I should have known it was coming. Maybe part of me did. You don't stay that close to someone for years without something cracking eventually. But with Ryan, I convinced myself we were different. Untouchable. We met freshman year, one of those instant friendships where you just click, no awkward getting to know you phase. From the start, we were inseparable. Study sessions that turned into all-night talks, parties where we only talked to each other, road trips just because we felt like it. He was the person I could be my worst self with, and somehow, it was always enough. People always thought we were dating, and we'd laugh it off. Nope, not like that. I'd say every time someone asked. It wasn't a lie, or at least it wasn't at first, but things started shifting without either of us saying it out loud. I felt it in the small moments, like the way his hand lingered a second too long on my back, or how I'd catch myself looking at his lips when he talked. But I buried it. I told myself that whatever I was feeling didn't matter. We were friends, and friends didn't screw things up by wanting more. Except one night we did. It was one of those late summer nights where the air is thick and everything feels heavier than usual. I'd just gone through a brutal breakup, and Ryan came over with beer and ice cream, because of course he did. That was Ryan. Always showing up, no questions asked, no expectations. We sat on the balcony of my apartment, talking about the usual things, how life felt impossible, how relationships were overrated, how maybe we were just meant to be alone forever. At some point, we got quiet. The kind of quiet that's thick with all the things neither of us was brave enough to say. You ever think, I started, then trailed off, unsure if I wanted to finish the sentence. Think what? Ryan asked, his voice low. I swallowed, feeling my heart thudding in my chest. You ever think we missed something? Like, maybe it's supposed to be us? He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared out at the city lights like he was trying to find the answer in them. And then finally he said, yeah, I've thought about it. And that was all it took. 1 second, we were sitting there, and the next I was kissing him. It felt inevitable, like we'd been moving toward that moment from the very beginning, and we'd finally run out of excuses to avoid it. We stumbled inside, laughing, hands fumbling as we found our way to my bed. And for a little while, it felt perfect. It wasn't just sex. It was years of trust, connection, and something deeper that neither of us could put into words. When it was over, we lay there in the dark, his arm draped over my waist, my head resting on his chest. For a brief, shining moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd figured it out, that we'd crossed the line and found something beautiful on the other side. But then morning came, and with it, the weight of everything we'd done. We didn't talk about it. We just went through the motions, coffee, small talk, avoiding eye contact like cowards. And when Ryan left, he kissed me on the forehead and said, "See you later," like nothing had changed. But everything had. At first, we tried to act normal. We hung out like always, watched movies, ordered takeout, pretended we were still the same people we'd been before that night. But the truth? We weren't. Every touch felt loaded. Every laugh edged with something unsaid. We kept sleeping together, but it started to feel less like something real and more like a habit. Something we couldn't stop, even though we both knew it was going to break us. I kept waiting for him to say something, to tell me how he felt, to admit that what we had was more than just convenience. But he never did. And the longer we went without talking about it, the more it started to hurt. The thing about Ryan was he made everything seem easy. He'd grin, crack a joke, and suddenly the world didn't feel so heavy. But love wasn't easy for him. I knew that. I knew him. But it didn't make it hurt any less when he pulled away. The end came quietly. One night, after we'd been tangled in my sheets, I asked him, finally, what we were doing. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Stay." He looked at me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he even said it. "I don't think I can." And that was it. The moment I knew I'd lost him, not just as a lover, but as my best friend. He stayed the night, but we both knew it was the last time. The morning came too quickly. He kissed me goodbye, soft and lingering, like he was trying to hold on just a little longer. And then he left, and with him, the life I thought we could have had. We tried to stay friends after that, but it didn't work. We were too broken, too full of things we never said. Every text felt like a reminder of what we'd lost. Every conversation like a goodbye we weren't ready to give. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. It's been months now, and I still think about him. Every time I see something he'd find funny, or hear a song he loved, or pass by the diner we used to go to after midnight. I miss him in ways I can't even explain. Not just the way he touched me, but the way he made the world feel manageable, even on the worst days. People always say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while I had him, all of him, and even though it ended, even though it wrecked me in ways I didn't know I could be wrecked, I don't regret it. Because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are just meant to pass through, leaving you with memories and a heart full of what-ifs. And even though it hurts, even though I'll probably always wonder what could have been, I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, he was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I'll always have that little piece of him. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. I thought it was going to be a quick trip to the post office. Just in and out, 5 minutes tops. I had one task: return a sweater I bought online during a moment of weakness at 2 a.m. You know the kind, looked great on the model, but on me? I looked like an overcooked burrito. I was determined to send it back before the return window closed, which naturally was today, because nothing motivates like the absolute last minute. The post office was only 5 minutes away, but I'd made the rookie mistake of going at lunchtime. The line was already snaking out the door, filled with people clutching packages and envelopes, all wearing that same expression. I didn't want to be here either. I considered turning around, but I'd already put too much effort into printing the return label and finding packing tape. I was committed. I shuffled to the back of the line, clutching my box, hoping maybe, just maybe, it would move fast. Spoiler, it didn't. The man at the front was locked in a 20-minute standoff with the clerk about international shipping rates, as if he could haggle postage prices the way people bargain at flea markets. The woman in front of me let out a dramatic sigh and checked her watch for the 5th time. A guy behind me was quietly humming a song that I couldn't place, but instantly hated. Meanwhile, I was mentally cursing my past self for not doing this sooner. The sweater had sat in its original packaging on the dining table for weeks, daring me to deal with it. I'd walked past it every day, thinking, I'll return it tomorrow. And now I was stuck in post office purgatory. I shifted from one foot to the other, scrolling mindlessly through my phone to pass the time. But all that did was remind me of other things I'd been procrastinating. Texts I hadn't answered, bills I needed to pay, notifications piling up like unanswered prayers. It was the same feeling I got when my email inbox hit 1,000 unread messages. Not enough to cause a panic, but just enough to make me feel like I was quietly failing at life. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The man at the front finally left, clutching his receipt like it was a trophy. The line shuffled forward a few steps, and I told myself we were making progress. But the new guy at the counter looked just as determined to have a full conversation about certified mail, and my patience was wearing thin. At that moment, the door behind me swung open, and a woman breezed in, holding at least 7 packages stacked precariously in her arms. She took one look at the line, blinked, and then, without hesitation, walked straight to the front, as if lines were just a social suggestion. The collective tension in the room shifted immediately. You could feel it, the silent outrage spreading through the crowd like a slow ripple. No one said anything at first, of course. This is how these things go. We all just stood there, waiting for someone else to speak up, our anger simmering under layers of politeness. It was the woman directly in front of me who finally cracked. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. There's a line. The line cutter turned around, looking genuinely surprised, as if she'd just noticed 15 people glaring at her. Oh, I just have a quick question, she said, smiling like that made it okay. The man behind me muttered, yeah, we all have quick questions. A few people nodded in solidarity, and the tension in the room thickened into something heavy and awkward. For a second, it felt like things might escalate, like we were one sarcastic comment away from a full-scale riot over postage fees. But the clerk at the counter just sighed and waved her through, because post office clerks are paid to move mail, not mediate social justice. The woman beamed and began her lengthy explanation about tracking numbers, completely oblivious to the collective rage radiating from the line behind her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself it wasn't worth getting upset over. This was just one of those small, infuriating moments that happen all the time, like people who play music on speaker in public or drivers who don't use their turn signals. It wasn't personal. It was just life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my turn came. I stepped up to the counter, slid my package forward, and tried to muster the energy to be polite. "Just need to return this," I said, as if the clerk cared. She scanned the barcode, slapped a sticker on it, and handed me a receipt without making eye contact. And just like that, it was over. Weeks of procrastination, hours of frustration, all boiled down to a 30-second interaction and a flimsy piece of paper. I walked out of the post office, feeling both lighter and absurdly annoyed that something so small had taken up so much space in my brain. The sun was out now, and the cool breeze felt like a reward for surviving the ordeal. I tossed the receipt into my bag, knowing I'd forget about it until it resurfaced 3 months from now, crumpled at the bottom like a relic from another life. As I walked to my car, I realized that most of adulthood feels like this, standing in line, waiting for your turn, doing things you don't want to do just to keep the wheels from falling off. It's not glamorous, and it's not always satisfying, but it's necessary. You show up, you deal with the small annoyances, and you keep moving. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, enjoying the quiet. The sweater was gone, the task was done, and for a brief, fleeting second, everything felt manageable. And maybe that's the best we can hope for. Small wins that make the messiness of life feel a little less overwhelming. One return package at a time. You never think it's going to happen to you. You read stories, listen to friends vent about their heartbreaks, and you shake your head, feeling sorry for them. But deep down you think, not us. We're different. We're solid. That's what I thought, anyway. I was wrong. It didn't happen all at once. It was like a slow leak, tiny drops of doubt that you barely notice until one day, you're drowning. It started with his mood swings. One minute he was sweet, affectionate like the man I fell in love with. The next he'd snap over nothing. A missed call, a simple question about his day. "Can you just give me some space?" he'd say, rubbing his temples like I was exhausting him. I told myself everyone has bad days. Maybe he was stressed at work. I made excuses for him, because that's what you do when you love someone. You forgive the cracks, hoping they don't grow into something you can't fix. The phone was next. He'd always been easygoing about it, leaving it on the table face up or handing it to me when I needed to borrow it. But suddenly, it became an extension of his hand. It was always with him, always locked, always on silent. He took it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I joked about it, he rolled his eyes and said, "You're being ridiculous. It's just a phone." But it wasn't just a phone. It was a wall between us, and I could feel myself standing on the other side of it, knocking on a door that would never open. Then came the absences. He started working late, always late. It was a different excuse every time. We're behind on a project. Had to grab drinks with the team. Lost track of time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't jump to conclusions. But the excuses started to stack up, and the empty space between us kept growing. One night, I asked if he was okay, if something was bothering him, if there was something I could do. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in weeks, and for a second I thought I saw the man I knew. But then he sighed, shook his head, and said, "You always do this. You're always looking for problems that aren't there." And just like that, I felt the air leave the room. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I smiled. Because what else can you do when the person you love makes you feel like a fool for caring? The final blow came on a Sunday morning. He was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Just a glance. Just to quiet the voice in my head that wouldn't leave me alone. The message preview read, "I had such a good time last night. Can't wait to see you again, Red Heart." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, feeling the ground shift beneath me. The shower water was still running, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. I knew I didn't have much time. My hands shook as I unlocked his phone, scrolling through the messages with the kind of numbness that only comes with shock. Her name was Lily. The texts were all there: plans, flirty banter, promises to meet again. Photos, too. Pictures of them at a bar, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm draped around her like she was the only thing that mattered. I sat there, holding his phone, listening to the water shut off and the curtain slide open. For a moment, I thought about throwing the phone at him, screaming, demanding answers. But instead, I just placed it back on the nightstand, right where he left it. He walked into the room, towel around his waist, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey," he said, running a hand through his wet hair. "What do you want for breakfast?" I stared at him, wondering how he could look me in the eye after everything. Wondering how long he'd been lying to me, and how I'd missed it for so long. "Whatever you want," I whispered, my voice hollow. He kissed me on the forehead, so casual, so normal, like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. Maybe I was the only one living in a reality where our relationship still mattered. That night, I packed a bag. Just the essentials: clothes, my toothbrush, my journal. I didn't tell him I was leaving. I didn't leave a note. What was the point? He'd already moved on. I was just catching up. The hardest part wasn't walking out. It was driving away, knowing there was no going back. I thought I'd cry, but the tears didn't come. I just felt empty, like something had been carved out of me, and all that was left was a hollow space where love used to be. He called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the texts, apologies, explanations, promises that it wasn't what it looked like. But it was exactly what it looked like, and no amount of words could undo what had already been done. I blocked his number that same day. It's been 7 months now, and the nights are still the hardest. Some mornings, I wake up expecting to feel his arm draped over me, only to be reminded that those arms belong to someone else now. But with every day that passes, the weight lifts a little more. I've stopped wondering what I could have done differently, because the truth is, nothing would have changed. If someone wants to leave, they will, and no amount of love can make them stay. I saw him last week, by accident, at a cafe I used to love. He was with her Lily. They were sitting close, sharing a croissant, laughing over something on his phone. I stood there for a moment, watching them, waiting to feel the familiar ache in my chest. But it never came. Instead, all I felt was relief. Because the thing about losing someone like him is that it's not really a loss at all. It's a release, and some things are meant to be let go. I walked out of that cafe without saying a word, head high, heart lighter than it's felt in a long time. And for the first time in months, I didn't look back. It was around 3 a.m. when the power went out. 1 second, my apartment was filled with the low hum of the fridge and the soft glow of the TV playing some late-night movie I wasn't really watching. The next, it all vanished, just darkness and silence, the kind that sinks into your skin and makes you feel alone in the way only a power outage can. I sat there for a moment, blinking at the sudden nothingness, waiting for the lights to flicker back on. But they didn't. Outside the window, the street lights were out too, the entire block swallowed by the kind of quiet you only hear at night. I sighed, reached for my phone, and realized it was almost dead, because of course it was. Well, shit, I muttered, standing up and fumbling my way toward the drawer where I kept a flashlight. I found it after knocking over half the stuff in the drawer, clicked it on, and watched the weak yellow beam struggle against the dark. I knew I should just go to bed. There was nothing else to do, but something about the silence felt too heavy, too thick. Like if I lay down now, I'd spend the whole night drowning in thoughts I didn't want to think. So instead, I grabbed my keys and decided to go for a walk. The air outside was cool and damp, with that faint, metallic smell that always comes before rain. The street was empty, all the windows dark, and for a moment, it felt like I was the only person left in the world. I wandered aimlessly, following familiar streets and alleys without really paying attention to where I was going. There was something oddly comforting about the quiet, the way the city felt softer, more distant, like a place that had slipped out of time. I ended up at the old playground near my apartment. I hadn't been there in years. Not since I was a kid, running around barefoot in the summers, back when this place still felt magical. The swings were still there, creaking softly in the breeze, their chains rusted and worn. I walked over and sat down on one, the cold metal seat pressing into my legs. I rocked gently, the swing swaying under my weight, and let the night wrap itself around me. I wasn't expecting to see anyone else, so when I heard footsteps behind me, I tensed. "Couldn't sleep either?" a voice asked. I turned to see a guy standing at the edge of the playground, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a hoodie that looked a size too big. He had that tired, slightly disheveled look people get when they've been awake too long, but his expression was open, curious. "Something like that," I said. He nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. "Mind if I join?" I shrugged. "It's a free playground." He smiled at that, just a small, lopsided grin, and sat down on the swing next to mine. For a while, we didn't say anything. Just two strangers on a playground in the middle of the night, listening to the soft creak of the swings and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Power out for you too?" "Yeah. Feels weird, doesn't it? Like the whole world just paused." I nodded, kicking at the dirt with the toe of my shoe. "Yeah, kinda nice though." He smiled, the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what I meant. We talked after that, the conversation drifting easily from topic to topic like we were two old friends catching up. His name was Nate. He lived a few blocks away, worked at a coffee shop I'd probably been to a dozen times without realizing. He told me about the weird customers he dealt with, the regulars who always ordered the same thing, and the one time someone tried to pay for a latte with a handful of loose screws. I laughed, and it felt good, like a release, like shaking off a layer of dust I hadn't even noticed had settled on me. "People are weird," I said. "Yeah," Nate agreed, his grin widening. "But sometimes that's the best part." At some point, the rain started. Just a light drizzle, more mist than anything else. Neither of us moved. "You ever feel," I said slowly, "like life's just passing you by? Like you're waiting for something to happen, but you don't even know what?" Nate leaned back in the swing, looking up at the cloudy sky. All the time, there was something comforting about the way he said it. Not like he was offering advice or trying to fix anything, but just understanding. We sat in the rain for a while, letting the silence settle between us again. And in that moment, it felt like enough. Just sitting there, sharing the night with someone who didn't expect anything from me. Eventually, Nate stood up, stretching his arms over his head. "I should probably head back," he said, though he didn't sound in any rush to leave. "You gonna be okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think so." He smiled again, soft and a little crooked. "Good. See you around?" "Maybe," I replied, even though I hoped the answer was yes. He gave me a small wave, then disappeared into the night, his footsteps fading into the distance. I stayed on the swing for a little while longer, watching the rain shimmer under the faint glow of the clouds. When I finally got up and started walking home, the streets felt different, less empty, somehow lighter, like the weight I'd been carrying had shifted, just enough to make it bearable. By the time I got back to my apartment, the power had come back on. The lights buzzed faintly, the fridge hummed, and the TV blinked back to life, casting familiar shadows across the room. I stood there for a moment, staring at the ordinary glow of it all, and smiled. Then I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and let the quiet wrap itself around me. And for the first time in a long while, I slept. It wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, who even thinks about something like that? But life has this way of setting traps you don't see until you're already caught. It all started when I agreed to dog sit for my friend Ethan. He was heading out of town with his girlfriend for the weekend and needed someone to watch his golden retriever. I didn't have anything better to do, so I figured, why not? Ethan lived with his mom, Tara, but she worked night shifts at the hospital, so it wasn't like I expected to see much of her. I was supposed to walk the dog, crash on the couch, and call it a weekend. Easy, or so I thought. The first night was uneventful. I watched TV, fed the dog, and went to bed early. Tara came home late, gave me a quick smile, and disappeared upstairs without much conversation. She was always nice but distant, kind of in that cool but exhausted single mom way. I'd known her for years, but I never really thought about her beyond the occasional small talk when I visited Ethan. But things were different the next day. It was Saturday and Tara was off work. I was making breakfast when she wandered into the kitchen, wearing a loose t-shirt and pajama shorts, her hair still messy from sleep. "Morning," she said, pouring herself some coffee. "Morning," I mumbled, suddenly hyper-aware of how casual she looked. We ended up eating together, chatting about random stuff. Her work, my plans after college, Ethan's annoying habits. It was easy, comfortable, and maybe that was the problem. After breakfast, she suggested we take the dog for a walk. It felt innocent enough, just a walk around the neighborhood talking about nothing in particular. But somewhere along the way, the vibe started to shift. She teased me about how I still hadn't found a girlfriend. I teased her back about how Ethan was her only man these days. It was light, playful, but there was this underlying tension, like we were both standing on the edge of something dangerous. When we got back to the house, she invited me to stay for a drink. It was barely noon, but I didn't say no. One beer turned into two, and soon we were sitting on the back porch, laughing like old friends. And then she touched my arm. It was a small gesture, just her hand resting on my forearm as she told a story, but it lingered. And suddenly, everything felt different, heavier. I should have stood up. I should have said I needed to walk the dog, or made an excuse to leave. But instead, I stayed. And then she kissed me. It was soft at first, like she was testing the waters. I froze, my brain screaming at me to stop. But then her hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and all the reasons why this was a terrible idea melted away. We stumbled inside, the dog's leash forgotten on the porch. I knew it was wrong. God, I knew, but I couldn't stop. Every kiss, every touch was like crossing another line I could never uncross. We ended up in her bedroom, the sheets twisted around us, the whole world disappearing for those few stolen hours. And for a while, it felt like nothing else mattered. But the morning after, that was a different story. I woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Tara stirred beside me, and for a moment, everything felt normal, like this was just another Sunday morning. But then reality hit. I was in my friend's mom's bed. I scrambled to get dressed, my heart racing. Tara sat up, watching me with a lazy smile. "You okay?" she asked, like we hadn't just blown apart every unspoken rule in the book. "I should go," I muttered, pulling on my shoes. She didn't try to stop me, just gave me a knowing look like she knew I'd be back. And she was right. I tried to avoid her after that, tried to pretend nothing had happened. But the pull between us was impossible to ignore. She'd text me late at night, sending casual messages that weren't really casual at all. And every time I caved, it was thrilling, addictive, but it was also a ticking time bomb. And it didn't take long for it to explode. Ethan came home early from his trip, catching us off guard. We were in the kitchen, too close, laughing about something stupid when he walked in. His smile faded the second he saw the way Tara and I were looking at each other. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. I froze. Tara opened her mouth to say something, but Ethan had already put two and two together. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "No fucking way. Ethan, You slept with my mom?" His voice cracked, disbelief giving way to rage. I tried to explain, but there was no explaining this. No way to make it right. "You were supposed to be my best friend," he said, his fists clenched at his sides. "How could you do this to me?" I didn't have an answer. He shoved me, hard, and I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. "Get the fuck out," he snarled, "and don't ever come back." I left without another word, the weight of what I'd done crashing down on me with every step. Tara tried to reach out afterward, but it was over. Whatever thrill we'd shared wasn't worth the cost. I blocked her number, deleted every message, and tried to move on. Ethan? He never forgave me. Blocked me on everything. Cut me out of his life completely. And honestly, I can't blame him. It's been years now, and the guilt still lingers, gnawing at the edges of every memory I have of that summer. Some mistakes fade with time, but others stay with you, like scars carved too deep to ever heal. And this one will haunt me for the rest of my life. The first time I tried flirting in an airport, I ended up on the wrong flight. Yeah, I wish I were making that up. It all started when my original flight got delayed. I was stuck at the gate for 3 hours, bored out of my mind, scrolling through Instagram like a zombie. That's when I saw her, a woman sitting a few seats down, wearing headphones and flipping through a well-worn paperback. She had this laid-back vibe, like someone who wasn't stressed about life, delays, or anything. Meanwhile, I was 5 minutes away from losing it because I'd already eaten my emergency snacks. Now, I know airports aren't exactly the best place to strike up a conversation, but something about her made me want to try. Come on, Jake, I told myself. It's either this or spend another hour watching cat videos. So, I mustered every ounce of courage I had and casually slid into the seat next to her. Good book? I asked, hoping I didn't come off like a creep. She glanced over, pulling one earbud out. Huh, the book, I said, gesturing toward it. Looks like a good read. She held up the cover, Murder on the Orient Express, and gave a small smile. Yeah, it's a classic. Nice, I said, nodding like an idiot. Agatha Christie. Trains and murder. Can't go wrong. She chuckled, which felt like a win. What about you? She asked. What are you reading? I froze, realizing I had nothing remotely intellectual to offer. Mostly The Departures board. Smooth, Jake. Real smooth. But she laughed. An actual, genuine laugh. Fair enough, she said. So, where are you flying? Denver. I replied, trying not to sound too relieved that the conversation was going well. You. Seattle, she said, tucking a curl behind her ear. Connecting flight. I've heard good things about Seattle, I said, nodding like I was an expert. You know, the rain, the coffee, the Space Needle. She smiled again. You've never been, have you? Not even close, I admitted, grinning. We kept chatting about books, airports, and the bizarre human tradition of paying $9 for a tiny bag of trail mix. It was easy, natural. For the first time in a while, I wasn't overthinking every word. And then the boarding call came over the speakers. Flight 237 to Seattle now boarding at Gate 12, the announcer said. Oh, that's me, she said, standing up and grabbing her bag. And before I could stop myself, I blurted out, Hey, maybe I'll come visit sometime. She looked back at me, amused. Or you could just sit next to me on the flight, she said, raising an eyebrow. I blinked. Wait, what? She nodded toward the gate. Seattle. Gate 12. Your flight, right? My brain short-circuited. Without thinking, I grabbed my backpack and followed her toward the gate, heart pounding. Jake, what the hell are you doing? You're going to Denver. But in that moment, I didn't care. I just knew I wasn't ready to let the conversation end. We handed our boarding passes to the attendant, and I kept waiting for someone to stop me, to tell me I was in the wrong place. But nothing happened. Somehow, I was waved through with a smile, like everything was perfectly normal. It wasn't until we were halfway down the jet bridge that reality hit me. I turned to her, panic creeping in. I think I'm on the wrong flight. She stopped, giving me a puzzled look. Wait, what? I'm supposed to be going to Denver. I admitted, feeling my face heat up. I just followed you here. She stared at me for a second, like she was trying to decide whether to laugh or call security. And then she laughed. Hard. Seriously? She asked, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. You followed me onto the wrong flight? Yeah, I said, scratching the back of my neck. Not my brightest moment. She shook her head, still grinning. Well, I guess that's one way to make a connection. Yeah, but now I'm literally flying in the wrong direction, I muttered. Before I could spiral into full panic mode, she reached out and squeezed my arm. Don't worry, she said with a playful smile. You can always book a return flight. I stared at her, stunned. Wait, are you saying I should come with you? She shrugged, her smile widening. Why not? You seem like you could use a little adventure. And just like that, I was walking down the jet bridge toward a plane bound for Seattle, wondering how the hell I'd managed to turn a random conversation into an impromptu trip across the country. It wasn't the smartest decision I'd ever made, but sometimes you just have to roll with it. And hey, at least I got her number. I met him when I wasn't even looking. Isn't that how it always goes? I was out with friends, celebrating someone's promotion at a rooftop bar. It was one of those nights that feels too perfect to be real. The city lights twinkling, a warm breeze cutting through the cool air, laughter everywhere. I'd just gotten back from the bar with a drink when I bumped into him, literally. My wine sloshed over the side of the glass, and he laughed, holding his hands up in mock surrender. I swear I didn't mean to ruin your night, he said. I laughed too. Don't worry, I said. It takes more than spilled wine to ruin me. And just like that, we started talking. It was effortless. The way conversations are when you feel like you're supposed to meet someone. He had a crooked smile that made me forget what I was saying mid-sentence. And he asked questions that made me feel interesting. Really interesting, like he wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. It was the kind of connection that sneaks up on you, quiet but electric. We spent the rest of the night together, tucked away in a corner of the rooftop, oblivious to everything else. When the party started winding down, I expected him to say goodbye and leave it at that. But instead, he leaned in with that same crooked smile and said, "Can I see you again?" I said yes before I even had time to think about it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. He was the kind of person who made everything feel like an adventure. We'd go on late-night drives just to find the best pizza in the city, or spend hours walking through parks, talking about everything from childhood dreams to embarrassing high school memories. He made me laugh so hard my ribs hurt, and when he looked at me, it felt like the world slowed down for a second. I hadn't felt that way in years. He wasn't perfect, but he was good, really good. He showed up, made me feel seen in a way I didn't know I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe I'd finally found someone who was in it for the long haul. But then, slowly, the cracks began to show. It started small, missed texts, plans that got canceled last minute. At first, I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. People get busy. Life gets complicated. But the little things started to add up. He'd go quiet for a day or two, only to come back with a casual "sorry, things have been crazy." He was still there, but not in the same way. It was like he was slowly backing out of the room, hoping I wouldn't notice. But I did. One night, after he bailed on dinner plans for the third time that week, I finally worked up the nerve to ask him about it. "Are we okay?" I asked, my voice small, even though I hated how vulnerable it made me feel. He sighed, running his hand through his hair the way people do when they're gearing up to say something they know you don't want to hear. "Yeah," he said slowly. I don't know. I think I need some space." Space. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard it before, too many times from too many people who never came back. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was racing. "How much space?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Just some." And that was it. No clear answers, no resolution. Just a vague, open-ended maybe that left me spinning. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he'd pursued me in the first place if he wasn't ready for something real. But I didn't. I just nodded and gave him the space he asked for, hoping, stupidly, that maybe would make things better. It didn't. The space between us grew wider with every passing day. The text slowed to a trickle, and when he did reach out, it felt forced, like he was checking a box. I told myself not to reach out first, not to seem desperate, but the silence was suffocating. I kept wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said or done differently to make him stay. And then, one day, I stopped waiting. I deleted his number, blocked him on social media, and told myself it was time to move on. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, just a quiet decision made in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I was tired of holding space for someone who didn't want to be there, tired of waiting for someone who had already left. The hardest part wasn't letting him go. It was letting go of the version of myself that believed this time would be different. I'd let my guard down for him, believed in something that wasn't real. And that's the thing about heartbreak. It's not just losing the person. It's losing the hope they gave you. In the weeks that followed, I went through the usual motions of moving on, deleted old photos, unfollowed mutual friends, distracted myself with work and Netflix binges. But healing isn't linear. Some days I felt fine. Other days, I catch myself wondering if he missed me, if he regretted the way things ended. I hated that I still thought about him, that he still took up space in my mind. But that's the thing about heartbreak. It lingers. Over time, the ache faded bit by bit. I stopped checking my phone, stopped expecting him to come back. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again, stronger, wiser, and just a little more guarded. These days, I'm still figuring it out. I'm learning that not every person you meet is meant to stay, and that's okay. Some people are just passing through, leaving behind lessons you don't realize you needed until long after they're gone. And maybe that's enough. I don't know if I'll ever see him again, but if I do, I hope I'll be able to look him in the eye and say, thank you. Not because he stayed, but because he didn't. Because losing him taught me how to find myself again. And that's something no one can take away from me. So here I am, still standing, still hoping, but with a little more caution this time. I know now that love isn't always about the grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it's just about showing up. And if someone can't do that, then they're not the one. Maybe love will find me again. Maybe it won't. But either way, I'll be okay. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing I've learned is this. I'm enough. Just as I am, with or without someone else. And that's a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. About a year ago, my brother and I decided to take a road trip through some national parks. It was something we'd always talked about doing, just the two of us, no itinerary, no deadlines, driving wherever the road took us. We packed the car with camping gear, snacks, and a few maps, planning to hit as many remote spots as possible. The kind of places most tourists skip over. One of those places was a tiny, unmarked campground deep in a forest somewhere in northern Idaho. It wasn't on Google Maps. We found it scribbled on the corner of a tourist map someone had left at a gas station. Beautiful, secluded, it said in messy handwriting. Perfect night sky views. We thought it sounded ideal. The road leading there was little more than a dirt path winding through dense woods. The further we drove, the narrower the path became, until the trees were so close they scraped against the sides of the car. We hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. Just us in the woods. Exactly what we wanted, or so we thought. We arrived just before dusk, setting up camp in the fading light. There were no other campers around, just the two of us in this tiny clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The air smelled like moss and damp earth, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. We built a fire, ate some sandwiches, and cracked open a couple of beers. For a while, everything was perfect. The stars came out, and the sky was so clear we could see the Milky Way stretching across the darkness. My brother joked about how we were finally off the grid, just two guys disconnected from the world. But then the forest got too quiet. At first, I didn't notice it. I was just sitting there, staring at the fire, lost in thought. But then my brother stopped mid-sentence, his beer halfway to his mouth. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I frowned, listening. "Hear what?" "Exactly." He looked around, his brow furrowed. No animals. No bugs. Nothing. He was right. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional owl, were gone. Just dead, suffocating silence. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I tried to laugh it off. "Come on, man, it's just quiet. This is what you wanted, right?" But my voice sounded hollow. Even to me, the unease started creeping in slowly, like the cold that settles in your bones when you know you've stayed outside too long. My brother shifted closer to the fire, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Then we heard it, a snap. It was the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking somewhere just beyond the reach of our firelight. Both of us froze. It wasn't a twig. This was heavy, deliberate, like someone or something had stepped on it. My heart started pounding in my chest. Probably just an animal. I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Whatever made that sound was big, and it was close. My brother grabbed the flashlight and shined it into the trees, sweeping the beam back and forth. The forest was dense, the trees packed so tightly together that the light barely cut through the shadows. Then the beam landed on something, just for a second, a figure. It was standing between two trees, half hidden by the shadows, but I saw enough to know it wasn't an animal. It was tall, too tall, and pale, with limbs that looked too thin for its body. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel it watching us. And then it moved, not like a person, not like anything I'd ever seen. It shifted sideways, gliding silently between the trees, its movements too smooth, too fluid. The way it moved made my skin crawl, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as the rest of us. "Dude," my brother whispered, his voice shaking. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the tent. "We're leaving. Now!" We didn't bother packing anything. We threw what we could into the car, hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. My brother kept the flashlight pointed at the tree lean, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. And then it stepped out of the woods, It didn't run. It didn't charge us. It just stood there at the edge of the clearing, watching. Its head tilted slightly, as if it was curious, as if it was trying to decide what to do next. My brother gasped. "It's smiling." I didn't look. I couldn't. I slammed the car into reverse and peeled out of the campsite, the tires kicking up dirt and rocks as we tore down the narrow road. I kept my foot on the gas, driving faster than I should have, praying the road wouldn't suddenly drop off into a ditch. When we were far enough away, when the trees started thinning and the road finally opened up, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. It was still there, standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still. That awful smile stretched across its face. But the thing that haunts me the most, the part one can't stop thinking about, was how it waved. It raised one long, twisted hand and waved goodbye, like it knew we'd be back someday. We drove through the night, not saying a word, both of us too terrified to look back. When we finally reached a diner off the highway, we sat in the parking lot for what felt like hours, just staring at the dashboard, trying to process what the hell we'd seen. We never went back to that campground, never talked about it either, but sometimes, late at night, I catch my brother scrolling through hiking forums, looking for mentions of strange things in the woods. And every now and then, I have this dream. I'm standing at the edge of a forest, just like that night, and I can see it just beyond the tree line, waiting, smiling. And in the dream, I always hear the same thing, whispered from the shadows. "Welcome back." Our school had this annual talent show that was supposed to showcase, actual talent. Singers, dancers, the occasional kid who thought juggling counted as a life skill. It was always a big deal because it was one of the few events where students could really show off without teachers breathing down their necks. But of course, the talent show the year we were seniors will always be remembered, not for the performances, but for the incident. The star of the show that year was supposed to be Trevor. Now, Trevor was one of those kids who looked like he'd been preparing for his big break since kindergarten. He did drama club, show choir, played the lead in every school musical. And if that wasn't enough, his mom handed out cupcakes at PTA meetings with little "Vote Trevor for Best Performer" cards taped to them. The man lived for the spotlight. But Trevor's spotlight got stolen. Enter Caleb. Caleb was not what you'd call a theater kid. In fact, most people thought Caleb only signed up for the talent show as a joke. He wasn't in any clubs, barely showed up to class, and spent most of his time skateboarding behind the 7-Eleven. His entire high school persona could be summarized as couldn't care less. So when Caleb walked into auditions with an old guitar and signed up for the last performance slot of the night, no one took him seriously. Most people figured he'd get on stage, play a couple of bad chords, and get booed off. Simple. Harmless. Except Caleb had other plans. The night of the talent show started off normal enough. Trevor kicked things off with an emotional performance of some song from Les Miserables. He was really into it, making intense eye contact with the audience like he thought talent scouts were lurking in the crowd. And, to be fair, the crowd loved him. People clapped, cheered, and whispered about how Trevor was definitely winning this year. The rest of the acts were fine. A couple of singers, a kid doing card tricks, and an 8th grader who tried and failed to do stand-up comedy. The audience clapped politely, but everyone was really just waiting to see Trevor take his victory lap at the end. And then it was Caleb's turn. When they called his name, Caleb walked onto the stage wearing a ripped hoodie, pajama pants, and mismatched socks. He had the same beat-up guitar slung over his shoulder, and for a moment, it looked like he wasn't even sure which end of it to hold. Everyone braced themselves for disaster. The teachers on the judging panel exchanged nervous glances. Even Trevor, standing smugly off to the side, had that "I'm about to watch a train wreck" grin plastered across his face. But Caleb didn't start playing right away. Instead, he pulled a fog machine out from behind the curtain. I have no idea where he got it, probably borrowed from the janitor or found in a dumpster somewhere. But the fact remains that Caleb rolled a giant industrial fog machine onto the stage, plugged it in, and cranked it to full blast. The entire auditorium filled with fog in about 30 seconds. The front row disappeared. The judges started coughing. And Caleb? Caleb just stood there in the middle of the chaos, grinning like an idiot. Finally, when the fog was so thick that the audience couldn't even see each other, Caleb strummed the guitar exactly once. And then he started singing. Except it wasn't a song. It was Sweet Caroline, the most obnoxious, overplayed, crowd participation song in the history of music. And here's the thing. The crowd went absolutely feral. It started slow, just a few people laughing and clapping along. But when Caleb hit the chorus and belted, Sweet Caroline, bum, 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 the whole auditorium lost their minds. People were on their feet, shouting the lyrics like they were at a stadium concert. Some kid in the back row stood up on his chair and started waving his shirt like a rally towel. The principal, who had been trying to maintain order all night, gave up entirely and just started clapping along. Caleb, realizing he had unlocked some kind of primal chaos energy, leaned into it even harder. He played the chorus 3 times in a row, each one louder and more out of tune than the last. The fog machine kept pumping out smoke, and by now the entire auditorium looked like a nightclub on New Year's Eve. Halfway through the 3rd chorus, Trevor stormed onto the stage, furious. You could see him trying to hold it together, but the combination of fog, off-key guitar, and a crowd screaming bum, bum, bum was too much for him. "You're ruining it," Trevor shouted, stomping across the stage toward Caleb. Caleb didn't even flinch. He just kept playing, "Bum, bum, bum. Get off the stage," Trevor yelled, grabbing the neck of Caleb's guitar. And that's when it happened. Caleb, in one fluid motion, swung the guitar around his body like he was auditioning for Guitar Hero and accidentally knocked Trevor square in the chest. It wasn't a hard hit, just enough to send Trevor stumbling backward into the fog, arms flailing like a cartoon villain falling off a cliff. The crowd lost it. People were crying from laughter. Teachers were desperately trying to restore order, but at that point it was too far gone. The entire auditorium had turned into one giant, chaotic sing-along. "Bum, bum, bum," echoed through the room like a battle cry. Trevor, defeated and humiliated, crawled off the stage while Caleb strummed the final, horribly out-of-tune note. And then, without saying a word, he unplugged the fog machine, slung the guitar over his shoulder, and walked off the stage as casually as if he'd just ordered a sandwich. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Here's the wildest part. Caleb won. I don't know if the judges were just too exhausted to argue, or if they genuinely thought Caleb's performance was some kind of postmodern genius. Either way, when they announced the winner, Caleb's name was called, and the entire auditorium erupted into cheers. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Just me, a bottle of wine, and the new season of some Netflix series I pretend to care about for an hour before passing out on the couch. That was the plan, but around 9 p.m., I got that text, a friend saying, "You out tonight? Everyone's at the new spot. You should come." I hesitated for all of 5 minutes before grabbing my coat and calling an Uber. I knew better, but nights like these never feel dangerous until they're already halfway over. The bar was loud and packed, just as I'd expected. The kind of place where the music vibrates through your bones and conversations exist only in fragmented shouts over someone else's shoulder. I told myself I'd have 1 drink, maybe 2, and head home. Famous last words. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the wall near the DJ booth, arms crossed, looking like he'd been dragged here against his will, but was making the most of it. He had this kind of understated magnetism, sharp jawline, messy hair, and a smile that looked more like a smirk, like he knew something the rest of US didn't. I wasn't looking for trouble, but the second our eyes met, I knew I'd found it. He didn't make a move right away, just held my gaze long enough to make my pulse quicken. It was one of those looks, part curiosity, part challenge. "You coming over, or should I?" And because I've never been good at saying no to a bad idea, I gave him a smile, squeezed past a group of strangers, and made my way toward him. "You look like you're having a terrible time," I said, stopping just close enough for our shoulders to brush. He laughed low and easy. "I am. Until now." And just like that, the night belonged to us. We talked for a while, or at least I think we did. Conversations in bars are like dreams. You remember flashes of them, little pieces that seem disconnected from everything else. I remember him leaning in close, his breath warm against my ear as he made some joke that had me laughing harder than I should have. I remember his hand grazing mine, the heat of it sending a shiver down my spine. And I remember the exact moment I decided, fuck it, let's see where this goes. We didn't stay long. We were out the door before midnight, stumbling into the cold night air with the kind of urgency that makes you feel like the night is a live wire, sparking under your skin. His hand found the small of my back as he guided me toward a waiting cab, and I leaned into him, feeling the thrill of it all. The closeness, the connection, the reckless promise of something that didn't need a future to feel good right now. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Small, messy, and full of mismatched furniture that hinted at a guy who never stayed in one place too long. But none of that mattered. The second the door clicked shut behind us, we were on each other, kissing like we were trying to devour every last second of the night. The clothes came off fast, hitting the floor in a trail that led us to his bed. It was the kind of sex that feels almost too good to be real, hot, urgent, and just the right amount of chaotic. For those few hours, nothing else existed. No deadlines, no existential dread. Just us, tangled in the sheets, chasing something we both knew wouldn't last, but felt perfect in the moment. And then morning came. I woke up to the harsh light of day sneaking in through the blinds, cutting across the bed like a knife. He was still asleep, his arm draped lazily over my waist, his breath slow and steady against my shoulder. For a moment, I stayed there, letting myself pretend that this was more than what it was. That this wasn't just another night I'd try to forget by the time I ordered my next coffee. But the weight in my chest told me otherwise. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a kind of emptiness that felt heavy and familiar, like an old coat you can't seem to stop wearing, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. I'd felt it before, after other nights with other people. I knew how this worked. The thrill, the high, the inevitable crash. I slipped out from under his arm, careful not to wake him, and started the familiar routine, finding my clothes scattered across the floor, pulling them on in silence, trying not to think too hard about how ridiculous last night's outfit looked in the harsh light of day. I knew I should leave quickly before the awkwardness set in. But as I reached for my shoes, he stirred, blinking awake with that sleepy, half-smiling expression that made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "Heading out?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I forced a smile. "Yeah, got stuff to do." He nodded, propping himself up on one elbow, his hair sticking up in every direction. "It was fun, though." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the cold morning air biting at my skin. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill wasn't just on the outside. It was in my bones, a lingering ache that I knew wouldn't go away with a hot shower or a cup of coffee. The Uber ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any conversation. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, and tried to convince myself that I was fine. That this was just another night, that I didn't need more than this. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't just about him. It never is. It was about the pattern. The way I kept throwing myself into these moments, hoping they'd fill the spaces inside me that always seemed to stay empty. And the way they never, ever did. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and crawled into bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unhelpful, as I lay there, waiting for the heaviness to lift. It didn't. It never does. I wish I could say that night was the last time, that I finally learned my lesson, stopped chasing moments that burned bright and fizzled out by morning. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. So I'll keep going out. I'll keep meeting new people, letting myself get swept up in the thrill of the night, telling myself that this time will be different, that this time it'll mean something, and maybe one day it will, or maybe it won't. Maybe I'll keep chasing something that doesn't exist, hoping that eventually the mornings won't feel so heavy. But for now, all I can do is keep moving, one night at a time, one morning after the next. The night before garbage day always sneaks up on me. I tell myself I'll take the trash out early, but somehow 11:45 p.m. rolls around, and I'm still sitting on the couch, pretending it'll take care of itself. Spoiler, it never does. This time was no different. I was halfway through an episode of a show I didn't even care about when I remembered garbage day. I glanced at the trash can overflowing with takeout containers and empty LaCroix cans, then out the window at the dark, cold night. For a moment, I seriously considered just skipping it. Would the world really end if I missed 1 week? But I knew how this game went. One missed week would turn into 2, and before I knew it, I'd have a small landfill sitting in my kitchen. So with a deep sigh, I dragged myself off the couch and tied up the garbage bag, the thin plastic straining against the weight of procrastination. As soon as I lifted it, something shifted inside, and a whiff of leftover pad thai escaped, instantly making me regret every life choice that led me to this moment. But there was no turning back now. I was committed. The walk from my apartment to the outdoor dumpster isn't long, but at midnight, it feels like an odyssey. The wind was sharp, slicing through my hoodie as I stumbled down the back steps, clutching the garbage bag like it was full of gold bricks instead of old burrito wrappers. When I got to the dumpster, I discovered a new obstacle. It was full. Not just full, overflowing. Trash bags teetered on the edge, pizza boxes poked out of the top, and someone had tossed an ancient-looking chair next to it, as if the dumpster had a side hustle as a furniture donation center. It looked like the aftermath of a college move-out day, and I felt personally betrayed by every person who got to the dumpster before me. I stood there, holding my sad little garbage bag, trying to decide if I should risk adding it to the precarious pile. The last thing I wanted was to be the person responsible for sending the whole mountain of trash crashing to the ground. But I also wasn't about to carry it back inside. This was a one-way mission. After a moment of hesitation, I hoisted the bag over my shoulder like a very reluctant Santa Claus and tried to wedge it into the top of the heap. It almost worked. Almost. But just as I let go, the whole stack shifted. And the next thing I knew, the bag tipped, split open, and sent its contents spilling across the pavement. I stared at the mess in horror. Loose receipts, greasy takeout containers, and a single rogue sock I hadn't even realized was missing spread out like a crime scene. For a second, I just stood there, hoping maybe the universe would rewind time and give me a do-over. No such luck. So there I was on my knees in the cold, picking up trash in the middle of the night like I'd hit rock bottom on a reality show. Every item I retrieved felt like a tiny humiliation, a reminder of every snack I shouldn't have eaten, every to-do list I'd ignored. I stuffed everything back into the torn bag as best as I could, whispering curses under my breath and wondering why adulthood felt like one long series of small, stupid defeats. Just as I finished gathering the last of the spilled garbage, the wind picked up, sending a crumpled takeout menu skittering across the lot. I chased after it, slipping on a rogue potato chip and almost eating pavement in the process. When I finally caught it, I felt both victorious and absurd. As I made my way back to the dumpster, I saw someone standing in the doorway of the building, my neighbor Claire. She had a bag of trash in one hand and an amused look on her face, like she caught me doing something much weirder than cleaning up a garbage disaster at midnight. "Rough night?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I straightened up, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "You have no idea." She laughed softly and tossed her bag onto the pile without hesitation, like someone who'd long since made peace with the chaos of garbage day. "Happens to the best of us." I gave her a tired smile, feeling a little less ridiculous. It was oddly comforting, knowing I wasn't the only one stumbling through life, tripping over potato chips at midnight. We were all just trying to get by, one spilled trash bag at a time. Claire gave me a small wave and headed back inside, leaving me alone with the dumpster once more. This time, I managed to wedge my bag into the top without triggering another trash avalanche. I stepped back, hands on my hips, and took a moment to admire my work. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was done, and that was good enough. As I walked back to my apartment, the cold air stung my cheeks, but it didn't feel quite as miserable now. There was something oddly satisfying about finishing a task, even if it was a mess from start to finish. It reminded me that life isn't about having everything together. It's about dealing with the chaos when it inevitably shows up, whether it's in the form of laundry, expired salsa, or a dumpster overflowing with someone else's bad decisions. When I got back inside, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but strangely content. The episode I'd been half watching earlier was still playing, but I let it run in the background, too tired to care. I'd earned this moment. The quiet satisfaction of having one less thing to worry about, even if it was just garbage. And as I lay there, drifting towards sleep, I realized something. Some victories are big, but most are small. Some days, you win awards or accomplish goals. Other days, you just manage to take out the trash without everything falling apart. And honestly, that's enough. At least until next garbage day. It was just supposed to be a quick stop at the gas station, fill up the tank, maybe grab a soda for the drive home. But when I pulled into the lot, there she was. Sophie. She was sitting on the curb near the air pump, a cigarette dangling between her fingers, wearing that same oversized denim jacket she used to steal from me back in college. Her hair was shorter now, a little messier, but there was no mistaking her. I froze for a second, my hands gripping the steering, like the car might disappear if I held on tight enough. Of all the places, on all the nights, it had to be this gas station. She looked up just as I killed the engine, her expression flickering from surprise to recognition in a heartbeat. "Well, shit," she said with a crooked grin, flicking ash from her cigarette. "Look who it is." I wasn't sure what to do, whether to wave, pretend I hadn't seen her, or just drive off and hope she'd forget I existed. But before I could decide, my legs had already moved, and suddenly I was standing there, hands stuffed into my jacket pockets, staring down at the girl I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Hey, Soph," I said, my voice a little hoarse. "Hey yourself," she replied, squinting up at me through the faint glow of the gas station lights. "Didn't expect to see you around here." "Yeah, well, life's weird," she snorted, stubbing out her cigarette on the edge of the curb. "Ain't that the truth?" Sophie patted the curb beside her, and before I could second-guess myself, I sat down. The concrete was cold beneath me, and the night air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp asphalt. We sat there for a moment, side by side, not saying much, just two people with too much history between them, trying to figure out what to do with it. "You still driving that beat-up thing?" she asked, nodding toward my car. I laughed, glancing back at the old Honda. "Some things never change." "Clearly," she said, nudging me lightly with her elbow. For a while, we talked about nothing. She told me she'd been in town visiting a friend, Mr. Bus, and ended up at the gas station waiting for an Uber that never showed. I told her about my job, how it was fine but not great, and how I wasn't really sure what I was doing with my life. She listened the same way she always used to, leaning in just enough to make you feel like she cared, but not so much that it felt heavy. At some point, the conversation drifted to old memories, the late-night drives with no destination, the questionable tattoos we swore we'd never regret, the stupid pranks we pulled on our roommates that somehow never got us kicked out. "I still think about that road trip to Nashville," she said, lighting another cigarette. I smiled. We got lost for like 3 hours, and somehow ended up at that weird gas station with the Elvis impersonator, she added, her laugh soft and warm. "God, that place was insane." We sat there laughing, and for a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all, like we were still those reckless kids who thought the world would always wait for us to catch up. But time had passed, and we weren't those kids anymore. Eventually, the conversation slowed, and the space between us grew quiet. Not uncomfortable, exactly, just different. Sophie flicked her cigarette into the gutter and gave me a sideways glance. "So," she said, her voice quieter now, "you ever think about us?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I stared down at my hands, turning the words over in my head, wondering how honest I wanted to be. "Yeah," I admitted, because there didn't seem to be much point in lying. "I do." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Me too." The thing about Sophie and me was that we were always good at the beginnings. The late nights, the spontaneous road trips, the stolen moments that felt like secrets we didn't have to share with anyone else. But we were never good at the rest. The quiet mornings, the everyday stuff, the sting. And eventually, that was what broke us. Too many starts, not enough middles. "I missed you," she said softly, almost like a confession. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd carried for years without ever fully knowing what to do with it. "I missed you too," I whispered. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us like a thread neither of us dared to pull. Then Sophie smiled, a little sad but still genuine. "You want to give me a ride home?" I smiled back. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." We stood up, brushing dust off our clothes, and climbed into my car like it was the most natural thing in the world. As I started the engine, Sophie leaned back in the seat, her hands resting in her lap. "Think we'll ever figure this whole life thing out?" she asked, her voice light, but not entirely joking. I glanced over at her, the glow of the dashboard lights soft against her face. "Probably not," I said, "but maybe that's okay." She smiled at that, a real, unguarded smile that made my heart feel just a little lighter. And as we pulled out of the gas station and into the quiet night, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we were exactly where we were supposed to be. And for now, that was enough. It wasn't the big things that tipped me off. It never is. It's the way he stopped saying, "Text me when you get home safe," when I went out with friends. The way he'd respond to my messages hours later with dry, one-word answers. I told myself people drift sometimes. Maybe he was going through something. Maybe he just needed space. But that gnawing feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I used to be the kind of person who trusted easily, who gave people the benefit of the doubt. If someone told me they loved me, I believed them. But love changes when doubt moves in. It becomes something heavier, harder to carry. And before you know it, every glance, every silence, every unanswered text feels like a betrayal waiting to happen. The first real red flag came when he started working out more. At first, I thought it was great. He'd never been one for exercise, and I liked the idea of us getting healthier together. But this wasn't that kind of effort. He didn't invite me to join him, didn't even tell me when he'd be going. He'd just come home later and later, sweaty and breathless, with vague explanations that didn't sit right. I'd ask, "How was the gym?" He'd shrug. "Phoenix. See anyone you know?" "Nah, just focused on my workout." It was the kind of nonchalant response that's supposed to put you at ease, but it only made me feel worse. If everything was so innocent, why did it feel like he was hiding something? Then there was his phone. It wasn't the notifications, those had all but stopped by then. It was the way he carried it with him everywhere, like it was a secret he couldn't afford to lose. He used to leave it charging by the bed at night. Now it was always tucked under his pillow. I'd catch him smiling at messages, but when I asked what was so funny, he'd just say, "Oh, nothing," and put the phone away like I wasn't supposed to ask. The worst part was the way he looked at me like I was an obligation. The spark we'd had in the beginning, the way he used to light up when I walked into a room, gone. Replaced by a kind of tired indifference that made me feel small, like I was taking up space in a life that didn't have room for me anymore. The night it all came crashing down, he told me he was going out with a few friends. "Just for a couple drinks," he said, kissing me on the forehead. I nodded, pretending I wasn't already suspicious. I'd heard this excuse too many times, and each one felt thinner than the last. I waited until he left. Then I opened the location-sharing app we'd installed a year ago for safety reasons, because back then, we still cared about each other. His little dot pinged, not at the bar he'd mentioned, but at a restaurant across town. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my keys, got in the car, and drove. I didn't know what I'd say if I found him. I just knew I couldn't sit at home, waiting for him to lie to my face again. When I pulled into the parking lot, there he was, sitting at an outdoor table, laughing with someone who wasn't me. She leaned across the table, touching his arm, her eyes locked on his in a way that made my stomach churn. He didn't look tired or stressed or distant. He looked alive, happy. I watched them for a few minutes, frozen in my car, trying to decide what hurt more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that I'd spent months trying to convince myself it wasn't happening. When they stood to leave, I saw her lean in and kiss him. Not a goodbye peck, not a see you later kiss, but the kind of kiss that speaks volumes. He kissed her back like it was the easiest thing in the world, like I never existed. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got back, the apartment felt colder, emptier, like all the life had been drained from it. I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for him, wondering how long I'd been living in a lie. He came home 2 hours later, smelling like her perfume. I was still sitting there, waiting. "Hey," he said casually, like everything was fine. "You still up?" "Yeah, I whispered, my voice hollow. He kicked off his shoes, running a hand through his hair. Long night. Gonna crash. Who is she? I asked, cutting him off. He froze for a second, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. What are you talking about? He said, shaking his head. You're being crazy. There was that word, crazy. The go-to excuse for people who know they've been caught, but don't want to admit it. I felt the anger bubble up, sharp and hot in my chest, but I swallowed it. I saw you, I said quietly, at the restaurant, with her. His face paled, and for a moment, I thought he might come clean, apologize, beg for forgiveness. But instead, he sighed like I was the one making his life difficult. It's not what you think, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Then what is it? I asked, voice steady even though I was breaking inside. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked to the door. He followed me, panic creeping into his voice. Wait, where are you going? Somewhere I don't have to wonder if I'm enough, I said, turning the knob. He called my name as I stepped outside, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. It's been 5 months now. Some days are harder than others. I still catch myself reaching for my phone, thinking about texting him. But then I remind myself that some people don't deserve a second chance. Some people don't even deserve the first. I heard through a mutual friend that he's still seeing her, the woman from the restaurant. And you know what? I hope she makes him happy. I hope he becomes everything for her that he couldn't be for me. Because I'm done trying to be enough for people who don't know what enough looks like. The other day, someone asked me if I regretted leaving without a fight. I smiled and said, no. Sometimes the only way to win is to walk away. And that's exactly what I did. It started off as nothing more than an offer to help. My friend Alex and I had been close since high school, and his mom, Julia, needed someone to fix a broken light fixture in their living room. Alex wasn't around. He just moved out of town for a new job, but I figured I'd swing by, help her out, and be on my way. Julia was always cool. She had that effortless charm, mid-40s but still looked like she could pass for early 30s. Blonde hair always perfectly in place, sharp green eyes, and a way of making you feel at home no matter what. Growing up, she was like a second mom to me, but as I got older, I started noticing things I probably shouldn't have. The way she laughed, the curve of her smile, the way she seemed way too put together for someone who claimed to be just surviving the week. Still, I never thought about her seriously. She was Alex's mom. Some lines you don't cross. Or at least, you're not supposed to. When I got to the house, she greeted me with that same warm smile I'd always known. You're a lifesaver, she said, handing me a beer before I'd even taken off my shoes. I've been meaning to fix that light for weeks. It's no problem, I said, trying to keep things casual. We made small talk while I worked, and when the job was done, she insisted I stay for dinner. Come on, she said with a grin. It's the least I can do. I can't let you leave on an empty stomach. I should have said no. I should have thanked her and left. But something about the way she looked at me, something playful, something daring, made me stay. Dinner was easy. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking wine and talking like old friends. She told me how quiet the house felt without Alex, how strange it was adjusting to living alone. There was a sadness in her voice, one she tried to mask with jokes, but I could feel it there, heavy and real. And then there was that smile again, the one that lingered a little too long. You've grown up a lot, she said, her eyes flicking to mine. It's strange seeing you like this. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. Yeah, well, time does that, I guess. There was a moment of silence, thick and charged. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. Just a light, fleeting touch, but it sent a shock through me. You okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I mumbled, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was her. But suddenly, we were kissing, slow, tentative, like we were testing the waters. And when she kissed me harder, all the warning bells in my brain shut off. We stumbled toward the couch, hands everywhere, clothes tugged aside in a blur of heat and urgency. It was reckless. It was stupid, but it was also impossible to stop. When it was over, We lay there in the dim light, both of us catching our breath. The weight of what we'd just done settled over us like a heavy blanket. We shouldn't have, I started, but Julia shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. I know, she whispered, but I don't regret it. Neither did I, and that scared the hell out of me. We told ourselves it would be a one-time thing, a mistake we'd leave behind. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, we found excuses to see each other. A quick visit here, a late-night text there. It was intoxicating, like playing with fire and daring it to burn you. Every time, we promised it would be the last. And every time we gave in, the guilt started eating at me every time I saw Alex's name pop up on my phone. He called to check in, telling me how much he missed home and how grateful he was that I was helping out his mom. You're like family to us, he said once, and the words felt like a knife to the gut. But I kept going back to Julia. And then, one night, everything fell apart. I was at her place again, sitting on the couch with her, laughing about some stupid inside joke. It felt too easy, too comfortable. I'd forgotten how fragile the whole thing was, how close we were to disaster. And that's when the front door opened. Alex walked in, his eyes bright with excitement, until he saw us. The smile on his face faltered, and his expression shifted to confusion, then disbelief. What the hell is this? He whispered, his voice cracking. I stood up, panic setting in. Alex, I can explain. But he was already piecing it together, the look on his face turning from shock to fury. No fucking way, he muttered, his fists clenching at his sides. You've been sleeping with my mom? Julia tried to speak, but Alex wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on me, blazing with anger and betrayal. You were supposed to be my best friend, he said, his voice shaking. How could you do this to me? There was no answer that would make it right. No excuse that could undo what I'd done. Alex shoved me hard, and I stumbled backward, almost falling. Get the hell out, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Alex, please. Get out. I left without another word, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Julia tried to stop me at the door, but I couldn't even look at her. It was over. Alex blocked me on everything, phone, social media, the works. I tried reaching out once or twice, but it was useless. I'd crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. As for Julia, things ended quietly between us. No dramati guvie, no closure, just silence. It's been years now, and I still think about that night. About the moment I could have walked away, but didn't. About the friendship I destroyed for something fleeting and impossible. Some mistakes fade with time. Others stay with you, carved deep into your memory. Impossible to forget. And this one? It's the kind that never stops. It started with a storm. One of those late spring thunderstorms that rolls in without warning, flooding the streets and making everything feel electric. I was already in for the night when Leah called. Power's out of my place, she said. Mind if I crash? Of course, I didn't mind. I never minded when it came to Leah. She showed up 10 minutes later, dripping wet and cursing the weather, with a bottle of wine tucked under her arm like some kind of peace offering. Sorry for the invasion, she said, shaking rain from her hair and kicking off her shoes by the door. You know you're always welcome, I told her, and I meant it. She could have shown up at 3 a.m. without warning, and I'd have made room for her. That's just how it was with us. We'd been best friends since college. 8 years, thousands of memories, and not a single line crossed. At least not until that night. We ordered takeout, drank wine on the couch, and watched the storm rage outside. It felt easy like it always did with Leah. That's the thing about best friends. They fit into your life so seamlessly, you forget there was ever a time they weren't there. At some point, we started talking about relationships. How hers never seemed to last, how mine never really started. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a little buzzed, her voice soft as she said, Maybe we're just bad at love. Speak for yourself. I joked. I'm a catch. She laughed, her breath warm against my neck, and something about the way she stayed there, her head resting against me, her hand brushing mine, made my chest tighten. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. You know, she whispered after a moment, sometimes I think we should have just tried. I felt my heart stop for half a second. Tried what? She shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. Like she wasn't flipping my world upside down. You and me. It hung there between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. I should have said something, anything, but I just sat there frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then she looked up at me, and before I could stop myself, I kissed her. It was slow, tentative at first, like we were both trying to figure out if this was real. But then it deepened, and just like that, everything shifted. Years of unspoken feelings poured into that kiss. And suddenly, we weren't just best friends anymore. We were something more, something dangerous. We stumbled into my bedroom, laughing quietly between kisses, like we couldn't believe we were doing this. And when we finally fell into bed, it felt inevitable, like we'd been moving toward this moment for years without realizing it. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, our bodies tangled under the sheets, the sound of rain still tapping against the windows. I wanted to say something, to ask her what this meant, but I didn't. I just held her, hoping she could hear everything I was too scared to say. "Are we okay?" she whispered into the dark. "Yeah," I whispered back, even though I knew it was a lie. The morning after was strange, but not in the way I expected. There was no awkwardness, no regrets, just this strange, quiet understanding that everything between us had changed. She stayed for breakfast. We made coffee and talked about nothing, pretending like we hadn't just crossed the biggest line in our friendship. And for a while, it worked. We didn't talk about that night. We just kept moving forward, as if pretending it didn't matter would make it true. But the thing about pretending is that it only works for so long. We started sleeping together more often. Late nights, lazy mornings, moments stolen between work and life. It was easy. Too easy. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe we'd stumbled into something that could last. But Leah wasn't built for permanence. She thrived in the moment, and I wanted forever. I didn't realize how deep I was in until the night she told me she was going on a date. "It's nothing serious," she said, fiddling with her wine glass. "Just a guy from work?" I nodded, forcing a smile, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. "That's great," I said, lying through my teeth. She gave me this careful look, like she knew something was off, but didn't want to dig too deep. And in that moment, I knew that she didn't feel the same way I did. We kept things going after that, but it wasn't the same. Every kiss felt like a goodbye. Every touch like a reminder that I was holding on to something that wasn't really mine. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to unravel. The night it all fell apart. We were lying in bed, her head resting on my chest like it belonged there. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the way the silence between us felt heavier than usual. But before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. "I love you." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. And just like that, everything shattered. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say that." I felt the ground drop out from under me. "Why not?" She sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her like it could shield her from what I just said. "Because I can't. I don't want to hurt you." "You already have," I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes full of sadness and something that felt a lot like regret. "I didn't mean to. I know." And that was it, the beginning of the end. She stayed the night, but it was different. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, soft and lingering, like she was trying to say all the things she couldn't. And when she walked out the door, I knew that I'd lost her. We tried to stay friends after that, but it was too hard. Every conversation felt forced, every laugh tinged with sadness. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart until we were just two people with too much history and not enough future. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still miss her. Every time it rains, I remember that night. The way she fell in my arms, the way everything seemed so simple just for a little while. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, if she regrets what happened between us, or if she's happier now with someone else. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while I had her. I had everything. And then just like that, it was gone. Would I do it all over again? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd never kissed her, that we'd stayed on our side of the line where things were safe and easy. But another part of me, maybe the bigger part, is grateful. Because even though it ended, even though it hurt more than I ever thought it could, at least I got to love her. And for a little while, she was mine. And maybe in the end, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. This story starts with one of the dumbest bets in human history. It was spring of senior year, right when everyone had fully embraced the "what are they going to do, suspend us" mindset. Our group was hanging out in the parking lot before school started, just loitering, eating gas station donuts, and talking about the most random stuff, when my buddy Chris made a declaration none of us were prepared for. I bet I can steal the mascot costume before the end of the day. Now, to understand why this was a terrible idea, you need to know two things. First, our mascot was a giant blue falcon named Freddy. Freddy was beloved. They rolled him out at every pep rally, football game, and even the occasional math competition. Second, the costume wasn't just some old, sweaty thing stored in a locker. It was kept in a locked closet in the gym storage room, and our vice principal, Mr. Harper, a man who took mascots way too seriously, had the only key. So, naturally, we all told Chris he was an idiot. "No way, man," I said. "You're not getting anywhere near Freddy." Chris just grinned. "Watch me." What followed was a series of events that spiraled so far out of control that by the end of the day, even the teachers were too confused to figure out how things had gone so wrong. The plan was simple. Chris would sneak into the gym during lunch, grab the key from Mr. Harper's office, which was conveniently unlocked most of the time, swipe the costume, and bring Freddy to the senior parking lot for a victory lap. Foolproof, right? Wrong. First problem? Chris didn't know where the key actually was. He assumed it would be in Mr. Harper's desk drawer or hanging on a hook somewhere obvious. It wasn't. So, in true Chris fashion, he started rummaging through every drawer, cabinet, and filing folder he could find, muttering curses under his breath the whole time. That's when Mr. Harper walked in. Now, a normal person might have apologized and made up a story about looking for lost homework or something. But Chris panicked. And what did he do in a moment of panic? He grabbed a pair of dodgeballs from a nearby bin and threw them at Mr. Harper. The first one missed. The second hit him square in the chest. Harper, stunned and furious, stood there for a second too long, which gave Chris just enough time to sprint past him, knock over a trash can, and bolt out of the gym. Somehow, he managed to escape into the hall without getting caught, but that left him with a serious problem. He still didn't have the key. At this point, any sane person would have called it quits. But Chris? Oh no, Chris was just getting started. That's when he ran into Amy, one of the cheerleaders, and possibly the only person in school who had worse impulse control than Chris. For reasons that are still unclear, he told her about the bet. And instead of telling him it was a terrible idea, Amy lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Oh my God," she said. "I know how we can get in." Now, here's where things went from bad idea to actively criminal. Amy had a friend on the custodial staff who had a universal key card for all the storage closets on campus. This wasn't just some skeleton key. It was the key to everything: gym closets, teacher supply rooms, even the AV equipment. "Borrow it," Amy said. "They'll never know." Chris, idiot that he was, decided this was a brilliant plan. They met up with Amy's friend during passing period, swiped the key card, and by the time lunch rolled around, they were standing in front of the gym storage room, ready to break into Freddy's lair. The door beeped, the lock clicked, and there, in all his blue-feathered glory, was Freddy the Falcon. Chris let out a victorious whoop, grabbed the costume, and stuffed it into a giant black duffel bag. They were halfway out the door when Amy had the second worst idea of the day. "You know what would be hilarious?" she said. "If we wore the costume through the cafeteria." For reasons no one will ever understand, Chris agreed. So, with absolutely no plan and zero regard for consequences, they marched into the cafeteria. Chris was wearing the giant falcon head. Amy had the feathery wings strapped to her back, and the entire room erupted the second they walked through the doors. "Freddy!" someone yelled, as if the real mascot had come to bless us with his majestic presence. At first, it was funny. Kids were clapping, laughing, and taking pictures for Snapchat. But then Chris got cocky. He climbed onto one of the tables, spread his wings, and shouted, "Falcon Punch!" before diving face first into a tray of mashed potatoes. That's when all hell broke loose. Inspired by the chaos, other students started throwing food, not just at Chris, but at everyone. One kid launched a half-eaten slice of pizza with the precision of an NFL quarterback, and it hit Amy square in the face. Someone else threw a milk carton, which exploded like a grenade. Within minutes, the entire cafeteria was a war zone, with mashed potatoes flying through the air like mortar shells. The teachers tried to stop it, but it was too late. By the time they blew the whistle, half the student body was either covered in food or actively engaged in a food fight of biblical proportions. And right in the middle of it all was Chris, still wearing the falcon head, sprinting toward the exit like a cartoon villain. That's when Mr. Harper showed up. He must have tracked Chris down from the gym, because he burst into the cafeteria with the fury of a man who had absolutely had enough of these kids. The second he saw Freddy the Falcon covered in mashed potatoes, his brain just short-circuited. "Get back here," he roared, sprinting after Chris like he was chasing a fugitive. Chris, panicking again, did the only thing that made sense to him. He threw the falcon head at Mr. Harper. It hit him square in the face. By some miracle, or sheer dumb luck, Chris managed to escape through the back doors, with Mr. Harper slipping on mashed potatoes in hot pursuit. The last thing anyone saw was Chris, still wearing the wings, sprinting toward the senior parking lot with a teacher yelling threats behind him. The aftermath was legendary. The food fight made the local news. The school sent out emails to everyone's parents, talking about unacceptable behavior and a severe breach of mascot security. They locked the Freddy costume away for the rest of the year, and Mr. Harper didn't speak to a single student for 2 weeks. As for Chris, he somehow escaped punishment. The administration had no idea who was behind the stunt, and every student kept their mouth shut because, well, snitches don't survive senior year. And to this day, whenever someone brings up the Freddy Falcon incident, Chris just smiles, shrugs, and says, "Worth it." And honestly, it was. It started in the most ordinary way. He slid into my DMs after we commented on the same dumb meme. Something about bad coffee and Mondays. "You've got good taste in memes," he wrote. I rolled my eyes but smiled anyway. It was harmless, just a friendly message from a stranger on the internet. I had no reason to believe it would become anything more than a quick laugh. But somehow it did. We started talking, slowly at first, just banter back and forth, sharing inside jokes as if we'd known each other for years. It was easy, fun, light. He was quick with a joke, always knew what to say to make me laugh. And after a while, I found myself looking forward to his messages. What started as random chats turned into nightly conversations. I told myself it was nothing serious, just two people killing time. But when someone starts feeling like the first thing you want to talk to in the morning and the last before bed, it stops being casual, whether you admit it or not. We met in person a few weeks later, after flirting through text had become unbearable. It was supposed to be a simple first date, grab a drink, see if the chemistry was real outside the safety of screens. But from the second I saw him, all those nerves melted away. He smiled, and just like that, I was gone. We spent hours at the bar, talking about everything from embarrassing middle school stories to our most irrational fears. He told me he was terrified of flying, but would get on a plane if it meant visiting every city on his bucket list. I told him I couldn't swim, and he made me promise that if we ever found ourselves near the ocean, he'd teach me. He made me feel special, like I was someone worth discovering. The night ended with us sitting on a park bench under the stars, the city lights humming quietly in the background. He kissed me, soft and deliberate, and whispered, "I think we're going to be trouble." I laughed, not knowing how right he'd be. For a while, it was perfect. We'd talk for hours, meet up after work, spend lazy Sundays tangled up in each other's lives. He made me feel seen, like I didn't have to try so hard to be anything other than myself. It was the kind of connection I'd spent years hoping for, but never thought I'd actually find. And slowly, I let my walls come down. But that's the thing about letting someone in. You don't realize how exposed you are until they start to leave. It started with little things. Missed texts, canceled plans. "Sorry, work's crazy" became his go-to excuse. And I tried to be understanding. Everyone gets busy, right? Relationships aren't supposed to feel perfect all the time. I told myself not to overthink it, but deep down I could feel something shifting. The easy conversations that used to flow between us became stilted, like we were searching for things to say to fill the silence. And then, one day he just stopped trying. We had plans to meet for dinner, But when I texted to confirm, he didn't reply. Hours passed, and by the time he finally responded, it was with a casual, "Can we do it another time?" I'm beat. No epaledi. No offer to reschedule. Just another excuse that felt like a goodbye in disguise. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the half-set dinner table, wondering how something that felt so right could fall apart so quietly. I told myself to give him space, to wait for him to come back. But deep down, I knew. He was already gone. It just hadn't hit me yet. Days turned into weeks, and the space between us grew unbearable. I texted him once just to check in, hoping for some reassurance, some sign that we were still okay. His response was polite but distant, like he was talking to someone he used to know. That was the moment I realized I was holding on to a version of him that didn't exist anymore. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. So I called him. I needed to hear him say it, to confirm what I already knew but didn't want to believe. He answered on the third ring, his voice tired and detached. "Hey," he said like nothing was wrong. "Are we okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, long enough for my heart to sink. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I think maybe we're not." And just like that, it was over. I hung up without saying goodbye, sat on the floor of my kitchen, and cried until there was nothing left. Not the loud, messy kind of crying, but the quiet, hollow kind, the kind that feels like your heart is breaking in slow motion. In the days that followed, I went through every stage of grief. I replayed every conversation, every moment we shared, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when it all started to fall apart. I wondered if I'd said the wrong thing, done something to push him away. But the truth is, sometimes people leave without a reason. Sometimes they walk away because staying feels harder, even if they care about you. And there's nothing you can do to stop them. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to be angry. But all I felt was sadness. This heavy, aching sadness that settled in my bones and refused to leave. It took me a while to accept that I wouldn't get closure. There wouldn't be a final conversation where everything made sense. No neat ending to wrap it all up. Some stories just end mid-sentence, leaving you to figure out the rest on your own. I still think about him sometimes. Not in a longing way, more like a dull ache, a bruise that hasn't quite faded. I wonder if he thinks about me, if he regrets the way things ended. I'll never know, and maybe that's okay. These days, I'm trying to be kind to myself. I'm learning that it's okay to feel hurt, that heartbreak isn't a weakness. It's just part of loving deeply. And as much as it scares me, I know I'll try again someday. Because despite everything, I still believe in love. Not the kind of love that promises forever, but the kind that shows up, the kind that stays. And until I find that, I'll keep showing up for myself. I'll keep building a life I love, one piece at a time. Because at the end of the day, I know this. I am enough, with or without someone else. And that's a kind of love no one can take away from me. The first time I tried to flirt at a pet adoption event, I ended up nearly adopting a lizard, which for the record was not the plan. I went there to pet dogs, feel good about life for an hour, and maybe, just maybe, strike up a conversation with someone cute. The event was held at a local park, and they had everything: puppies, kittens, rabbits, even a few older dogs with heart-melting Adopt Me bandanas. I figured, hey, this is the perfect place to talk to someone. Cute animals are an instant conversation starter, right? That's when I saw her, crouched by a pen full of wiggly, excited puppies. She was scratching a golden retriever behind the ears, and the smile on her face could have powered the whole city. She looked like the kind of person who gave great hugs and knew the names of all the constellations. Naturally, my brain decided this was the perfect time to make a move. I took a deep breath, wiped my sweaty hands on my jeans, and casually walked over. "That's a good one," I said, nodding at the retriever. "Solid fur-to-cuteness ratio." She laughed, and I felt my heart do a little backflip. "Yeah," she said, scratching the dog's belly. "He's basically perfect." "So, are you thinking about adopting?" I asked, doing my best to sound chill and not like I was rehearsing every word in my head. She gave me a playful smile. "Maybe. What about you?" "Oh, I'm not allowed to adopt anything," I said, with a completely unnecessary amount of seriousness. "I once killed a cactus." She snorted an honest-to-God snort, and I knew right then that I liked her. "That's impressive," she said. "A real talent. I like to think of it as a gift," I replied, feeling bolder now that she was laughing. "Some people have green thumbs. I have cursed ones." We kept talking, moving from the puppy pen to the kittens and swapping random life stories along the way. I learned that her name was Mia. She was a graphic designer, and she'd fostered over a dozen animals. Meanwhile, I did my best to sound interesting, though my biggest achievement at that point was successfully changing the batteries in my smoke detector without calling my landlord. Things were going so well. For once, I wasn't awkwardly stumbling through my words or making weird jokes that didn't land. I was actually having fun. And then, the lizard happened. We were walking past the small pets section, mostly bunnies and guinea pigs, when Mia stopped at a tank with a bearded dragon inside. "Oh my God," she whispered, leaning in closer. "Look at this guy." I followed her gaze and found myself staring at a very grumpy-looking lizard. "Wow," I said. "He looks like he just got denied a loan." Mia burst out laughing. "He really does," she said, eyes sparkling. "Look at his little face. He's like, I have excellent credit." We stood there, giggling at the lizard like two kids in detention. And that's when it happened. One of the volunteers saw us and, before I could stop him, walked over with a big smile and said, "You like him? He's up for adoption." Mia gave me a mischievous look. "You said you couldn't adopt anything, right? But what about this guy? He's a cactus with legs." The volunteer chuckled. "He's actually pretty low maintenance. Just needs some crickets and the occasional heat lamp." Now, a smarter man would have laughed it off and politely declined. But no, my brain decided this was the perfect opportunity to impress Mia. "You know what?" I said, puffing on my chest like an idiot. "Maybe I will adopt him." The volunteer beamed. "Great, I'll grab the paperwork." Before I could backpedal, Mia looked at me with mock seriousness. "You're really going to do it?" "Of course," I said, trying to sound confident even though I had no idea what I was getting myself into. How hard can it be? Spoiler, taking care of a lizard is a lot harder than it looks. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about Mia, who was now watching me with the kind of amusement you reserve for people about to make a terrible decision. The volunteer returned with a clipboard and a small plastic tank containing the bearded dragon. "He's all yours," he said cheerfully. "His name's Gary." "Gary," I repeated, staring at the grumpy little lizard in disbelief. "Yeah, he looks like a Gary." Mia bit her lip, trying not to laugh. "So, what are you going to do with Gary?" Take him home, set up a little terrarium, teach him to do taxes." She laughed again, a bright, infectious laugh that made my heart race. "You're really something, you know that?" "Thanks," I said, holding Gary's tank awkwardly under one arm. "So, since I've adopted a lizard and all, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime?" Mia tilted her head, clearly amused. "I think I'd like that." And just like that, she took out her phone, typed in her number, and handed it to me with a grin. "Text me when Gary settles in." I grinned back, feeling like the luckiest idiot in the world. "Deal." As she walked away, I looked down at Gary, who stared back at me with his perpetually unimpressed expression. "Well, Gary," I muttered, "I guess we're in this together now." And that's how I accidentally adopted a lizard while trying to flirt with a woman at a pet adoption event. Was it the smoothest move? Not even close. But hey, Mia gave me her number, and Gary turned out to be a pretty chill roommate. Life's weird like that. It started with a fight, not one of those explosive, yelling matches. Just the kind of small, quiet argument that creeps in when two people know each other too well. Sam and I have been friends for years, and when you've been that close to someone for that long, sometimes things boil over without warning. He'd shown up at my door that night, pissed off about something I said earlier. Something dumb, probably like how he always bailed on plans last minute. I don't even remember the details. I just remember the way he looked, standing there in the hallway, soaked from the rain and frustrated, his jaw tight like he was holding back a dozen things he'd never say. "You think I don't care," he said, shaking water from his hair. "But I do. I care about you more than anyone." I crossed my arms, feeling the same mix of anger and affection that always bubbled up with him. "Then stop acting like I don't matter." He ran a hand down his face, exasperated. Jesus, you don't get it, do you? Then explain it to me. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Explain why I always feel like I'm on the outside looking in. He stared at me for a long time, breathing hard, and then he just kissed me. No warning, no build-up, just the kind of kiss that's been simmering under the surface for years, waiting for the right crack to come through. And that crack, apparently, was this fight. I kissed him back before I even had a chance to think about what it meant. It was fast and messy, all teeth and frustration, like we were trying to make up for lost time. And when we finally pulled away, gasping for breath, he rested his forehead against mine, his hands still gripping my waist like he was afraid I'd disappear. I didn't want this to happen like this, he whispered. Me neither, I admitted, but it didn't stop me from kissing him again. We stumbled into my apartment, soaked from the rain, shedding clothes, and leaving a trail of wet fabric across the floor. And just like that, the line between us, years of friendship, trust, and carefully buried feelings, disappeared. It felt reckless, but it also felt, right, like we were finally being honest with each other for the first time. Afterward, we lay tangled together in my bed, the room still smelling like rain. I could feel his heartbeat under my hand, steady and reassuring. And for a moment, I thought maybe we'd just cracked the code. Maybe this was how it was always supposed to be. But the thing about crossing lines is that you can't uncross them. The next morning was awkward in that quiet, unavoidable way. We tried to act like it was no big deal. Just another moment, just two friends caught in a storm. But every glance, every brush of skin felt heavier now. So, he said, pulling his shirt back on, "Are we good?" "Yeah, Elite. We're good." And for a little while, it felt like we were. We fell into this strange, unspoken rhythm. Friends most days, lovers some nights, but never anything more than that. We didn't talk about what it meant, and neither of us dared to ask where it was going. We just let it happen, like a current pulling us along, too afraid to fight it and too scared to see where it would take us. The problem is currents have a way of sweeping you under. It didn't take long for me to realize I was in trouble. Somewhere between the stolen kisses and the nights spent wrapped in each other's arms, I fell for him. Hard. But Sam? He was still Sam. Charming, affectionate, but always keeping just enough distance to make it clear that this wasn't forever. I kept hoping he'd change his mind. That maybe one night, he'd look at me and see what I saw when I looked at him. But hope is a dangerous thing, especially when it's built on something as fragile as friendship. It all unraveled one night when he told me he was seeing someone else. "It's casual," he said, like it wasn't a big deal. "Just a girl I met at work." I forced a smile, even though it felt like my ribs were collapsing inward. "That's great," I said, pretending the words didn't taste like poison in my mouth. He gave me a careful look like he could sense something was off, but didn't know how to fix it. And that was when I realized he didn't feel the same way. Not even close. I told myself I could handle it, that we could go back to being friends, that I could push my feelings down deep enough to make them disappear. But love doesn't work like that. You can't unfeel it, no matter how hard you try. The last time we slept together, I knew it would be the end. I could feel it in the way he held me loose, like he was already halfway out the door. And I hated myself for letting it happen, for holding on to something I knew wasn't mine. When morning came, he kissed me goodbye, soft and quick like a habit. "See you later?" he asked, his voice hopeful, like he wanted to believe we could still be us. I nodded, even though I knew we couldn't. "Yeah, see you." And then he left, and with him went everything I'd been too scared to admit I wanted. We tried to stay friends after that, but it was like trying to wear a coat that no longer fit. Every conversation felt strained, every laugh forced, and slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. Not because we wanted to, but because we didn't know how to stay. It's been months now, and I still think about him. Every time it rains, I remember that night. The way he kissed me, the way everything felt possible for just a little while. I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, rereading our texts, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best decision you'll ever make or the worst mistake of your life. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had him, all of him. And even though it ended, even though it tore me apart, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are just meant to pass through. leaving you with memories and a heart full of what-ifs. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt? I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, he was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone that much. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. 2 summers ago, I took a job as a fire lookout deep in the mountains. It sounded perfect: solitude, nature, and a chance to disconnect for a while. My job was simple: stay in a remote watchtower, keep an eye out for any signs of wildfire, and radio in if I saw smoke. The tower was isolated, miles from the nearest ranger station, perched high on a rocky ridge surrounded by dense forest. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just a radio and a logbook. It was exactly what I thought I needed. The first few days were peaceful. I'd wake up to the sunrise over the mountains, drink coffee on the balcony, and watch hawks circle lazily in the sky. At night, I'd sit under the stars, listening to the breeze whisper through the pines below. The forest was alive with sounds: chirping insects, hooting owls, the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. It felt like I'd stepped into another world, one untouched by civilization. Then, on the 4th night, the radio crackled to life. It was past midnight, and I'd been sitting on the balcony, enjoying the quiet. The radio was only supposed to pick up transmissions from the ranger station or nearby towers, but this voice, it wasn't anyone I recognized. "Is anyone there?" the voice asked, crackling through the static. It sounded distant, too far away to be from the ranger station. I leaned in, grabbing the mic. "This is Tower 9. Who's calling?" There was a long pause, followed by more static. Then the voice came through again, softer this time. I'm lost." I sat up straighter, adrenaline kicking in. "A hiker, maybe? Someone hurt and disoriented?" I grabbed the mic again. "Where are you? Can you describe your location?" Another pause, then almost too quiet to hear. "I think I'm near you." My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, scanning the forest below with the binoculars. The moonlight cast long shadows across the trees, but everything looked still. Too still. "Can you see the tower?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "We have lights on the balcony. Look for those." The radio hissed with static for a moment. Then the voice whispered, "I see you." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I slowly lowered the binoculars, my pulse hammering in my ears. The forest below was empty, just the dark outlines of trees and rocks. "I'm coming," the voice said, crackling through the static. "Don't move." Something about the way they said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a promise. I turned off the radio. I know, you're not supposed to do that. But something was wrong. Deeply, profoundly wrong. I felt it in my gut, that primal sense of danger you can't explain. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the forest again, sweeping the beam across the treetops and the trail that led up to the tower. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow flickering between the trees. But when I focused the light, there was nothing, just empty woods. I locked the door to the tower, slid the bolts into place, and double-checked the windows. My hands were shaking. The wind had picked up, making the tower creak as it swayed slightly on its stilts. I sat down at the desk, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. Maybe one of the rangers messing with me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the metal stairs leading up to the tower. I stood perfectly still, my breath caught in my throat, listening. They were slow, each step careful, measured. Someone was climbing the stairs, one step at a time. I shone the flashlight at the door, heart pounding. The beam bounced slightly with the tremor in my hand. I counted the steps as they grew louder. 1, 2, 3. They reached the landing, just outside the door. The handle rattled once, twice. Then it stopped. I stared at the door, every muscle in my body screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped 30 feet above the ground, alone in the middle of nowhere. For a long moment, there was silence. Just the wind and the groan of the tower shifting slightly in the breeze. I held my breath, waiting for the handle to rattle again, or worse, for the door to open. But instead, something far worse happened. From the other side of the door, I heard my own voice. "Let me in." The words were muffled, but unmistakable. It was my voice, down to the same cadence and pitch. It sounded like I was standing just on the other side, whispering through the wood. I felt cold all over, my skin crawling. My heart was racing so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. I backed away from the door, gripping the flashlight tighter, my mind reeling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. "Let me in," the voice whispered again. "It's cold out here." I clamped my hand over my mouth, trying not to scream. The footsteps started again, moving slowly, deliberately around the balcony, circling the tower. I heard them pause at each window, as if whatever it was looking for a way in. I didn't dare move. I sat in the corner, flashlight clutched in my hand, heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps continued their slow, deliberate circle, and every time they reached a window, I heard that same voice, my voice, whispering, "Let me in." They circled the tower 3 times. 4, 5, each time stopping at every window, each time whispering, and then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. The forest went still again. No wind, no footsteps, just the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. I stayed in that corner until dawn, too terrified to move, my eyes locked on the door. When the first light of morning crept through the windows, I finally worked up the courage to check outside. The balcony was empty. The stairs were empty. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone or anything had been there. I turned the radio back on, heart still racing, and tried to call the ranger station. No answer, just static. I left that tower later that morning, packing my things in a daze and hiking down the trail without looking back. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? But every now and then, I hear it again, late at night, just as I'm drifting off to sleep. "Let me in." And I know, somewhere out there, in the dark, it's still looking for me. It didn't hit me all at once. I think that's what makes it worse. How slowly betrayal creeps in, so subtle that by the time you realize what's happening, it's already wrapped around you like a noose. It started with little things, like him canceling plans at the last minute or suddenly being glued to his phone. Harmless, right? That's what I told myself. Everyone gets busy. People need space. But then the excuses started stacking up. "Can't make it tonight. Stuck at work. Just grabbing a drink with the guys. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." He said it with a smile every time, like he was daring me to question him. And every time I let it go. Because what's a relationship without trust, right? Except it wasn't really trust. It was avoidance. A desperate attempt to avoid admitting what I already knew deep down. Something was wrong. One night, he came home with a new cologne. I noticed it the second he walked through the door, the scent sharp and unfamiliar. "You smell good," I said, trying to sound casual. He smiled, that easy grin I used to love. "Oh yeah, just something new I picked up." That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was that he never wore cologne for me anymore. When was the last time he dressed up or done something thoughtful for us? I couldn't remember. I started paying more attention after that. The way he smiled at his phone. The way he angled the screen away whenever I was near. The way his texts became fewer, colder. He'd disappear for hours, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And when I asked where he'd been, he'd laugh. "You're acting paranoid," he'd say, brushing me off like I was a child asking silly questions. That word paranoid made me feel small, made me doubt myself. Am I being too much? Too needy? Am I suffocating him? But then came the day I found the receipt. It was in his jacket pocket, crumpled and forgotten. A dinner for 2 at a restaurant we'd never been to. I stared at it, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he took a client out. Maybe it was innocent. But my gut twisted in protest, and no amount of rationalizing could undo the knot forming in my chest. I confronted him that night, the receipt clutched in my hand like a loaded gun. "Who did you have dinner with?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't even flinch, just gave me that same tired smile, the one people use when they've already made up their mind to lie. "It was work," he said, shrugging. "A business thing. You're making it weird." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there was something hollow in the way he said it. like he'd rehearsed the line 100 times. And suddenly, I saw it, the cracks, the distance, the nights apart. All the little things I'd ignored, hoping they didn't add up to the truth. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. His phone was on the nightstand, glowing softly in the dark. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding. I told myself not to do it. Just let it go. But I couldn't. I had to know. His phone was unlocked. It opened right to a message thread. Her name glowing at the top. Hannah. The texts were casual but intimate in a way that felt like a knife to the chest. Plans for secret lunches. Jokes they didn't share with anyone else. And at the bottom, a message from earlier that night. I miss you already. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, feeling my world collapse around me. He'd been lying to me, right to my face, and I'd let him. I convinced myself that love was about trust. But what do you do when trust turns out to be a lie? He woke up as I sat there, the phone still in my hand. For a moment, he looked confused, disoriented. Then he saw the screen, and I watched the color drain from his face. Wait, he said, sitting up. I can explain. Don't. I whispered, my voice shaking. Just don't. He reached for me, but I pulled away. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just numb. Like every emotion I had was locked behind a wall I wasn't ready to break. I didn't want you to find out like this, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. That made me laugh, an ugly, bitter laugh I didn't recognize as my own. Oh, so you didn't want me to find out? Just later? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? There was nothing left to explain. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? He asked, panic creeping into his voice. Somewhere I don't have to wonder if I'm enough, I said, not bothering to look back. He called after me, but I was already gone. It's been 6 months since that night. Some days, it still hurts like a dull ache that never really goes away. I catch myself thinking about him sometimes, wondering if he's still with her. But then I remind myself it doesn't matter. His lies aren't my burden to carry anymore. The other day, a friend asked if I'd forgiven him. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. No, I said, but I've forgiven myself for staying as long as I did. And that's enough for now. It started with me trying to change a light bulb. Should have been a quick job, 5 minutes tops. The hallway bulb had burned out 3 days ago, and every time I passed under the dark fixture, I told myself, you'll get to it. It's not urgent, but after almost tripping over my own shoes for the 4th time that morning, I decided it was finally time to tackle it. Naturally, the first problem was finding a replacement bulb. I opened the closet where I keep the random assortment of things I never organized. Extension cords tangled like spaghetti, a flashlight without batteries, old Christmas lights that I didn't remember buying. No light bulbs in sight. I tried the junk drawer in the kitchen, where hope goes to die. Pins that didn't work, a collection of twist ties, takeout soy sauce packets, but no bulb. I could feel my frustration growing. But at this point, it wasn't even about the hallway anymore. It was the principle of the thing. I was going to change that stupid bulb if it killed me. Eventually, I found one buried in a box of stuff left over from my last move. I held it up like a trophy, victorious. This was it, the first win of the day. But when I climbed onto the chair and tried to screw it into the fixture, it immediately became clear. It didn't fit. Wrong size. Of course. I stared at the bulb, and the bulb stared back, mocking me with its uselessness. For a moment, I considered shoving it in there anyway, twisting until it sort of fit, but I knew that was just asking for trouble. And so, with a deep sigh, I climbed down from the chair and accepted my fate. I'd have to go to the hardware store. Hardware stores are not my natural habitat. Walking through one makes me feel like a lost child, surrounded by shelves of things I should probably know how to use but don't. I wandered through the aisles, trying to look like I belonged, scanning rows of light bulbs labeled with numbers and words that made no sense to me. Soft white, cool white, warm white, lead, CFL. There were charts showing which bulb went with which fixture, but they might as well have been written in ancient runes. I grabbed the first one that seemed vaguely right and hoped for the best. At the checkout, the cashier gave me a polite nod as she scanned the bulb. "You need anything else?" she asked, like she knew I had no idea what I was doing. "Nope, just this," I said, trying to sound confident. She smiled the way people do when they're humoring a lost cause, and I walked out feeling both judged and vaguely accomplished. Back at home, I climbed onto the chair again, ready to finish what I'd started. I carefully screwed in the new bulb, flipped the switch, and nothing. No light, just darkness, like the universe wanted me to sit there and think about my mistakes. At first, I stood in disbelief, flipping the switch on and off like some kind of electrical sorcerer. But no amount of switching did anything. The bulb was fine. The problem, it seemed, was bigger than that. Maybe the fixture was broken, or the wiring, or maybe, just maybe, the entire concept of electricity was an elaborate prank, and I was the punchline. I stared up at the dark fixture, wondering what kind of person I was becoming. Was this how it started? First, you can't change a light bulb, and next thing you know, your life is spiraling. You're eating cereal for dinner every night, and you've stopped answering texts. The absurdity of the whole thing hit me all at once. And before I knew it, I was laughing, half out of frustration, half because sometimes the only way to survive life's little disasters is to laugh until it stops hurting. I gave up on the bulb for the time being, climbed off the chair, and flopped onto the couch. The hallway could stay dark for now. There were worse things than bad lighting, and honestly, I'd already given the bulb more energy than it deserved. I grabbed my phone and scrolled mindlessly for a bit, pretending the world outside my apartment didn't exist. At some point, I found myself looking up how to fix light fixtures on YouTube, because this is what adulthood is, teaching yourself things you probably should have learned years ago, one video tutorial at a time. Just as I was about to dive into a step-by-step video featuring a disturbingly cheerful handyman, my phone buzzed with a text from a friend. Want to grab dinner? Part of me wanted to say no. The light bulb had drained me, and the thought of being social felt like too much. But another part of me, the part that knew sitting at home alone wasn't the answer, typed back, yeah, I'm in. Dinner was nice. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries at a local diner, but it felt good to sit across from someone and talk about dumb things, memes, old inside jokes, random gossip. For a little while, the broken light bulb didn't matter. Nothing mattered, really, except the people at that table and the shared laughter over fries that were probably bad for us. When I got back home later that night, I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the dark fixture. It felt silly, how much space this small problem had taken up in my head earlier. I knew I'd get around to fixing it eventually, just like I always do with everything else. But not tonight. Tonight I was choosing to let it go. Because sometimes life is about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And tonight the light bulb could wait. I shuffled into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the couch, feeling oddly at peace with the unfinished things in my life. The hallway was dark, sure, but everything else? Everything else felt light. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Honestly, I didn't even see it coming. If you had told me a few months ago that I'd end up in the situation I did, I would have laughed it off. But some things happen so fast. You don't realize you're falling until you've already hit the ground. It started with a favor. My friend Jason was heading out of town for a week, and he asked me to help his mom, Dana, with some things around the house. Little stuff like fixing a leaky faucet and mowing the lawn. Dana had always been kind to me, one of those moms who offered you snacks even if you said you weren't hungry and sent you home with leftovers. I agreed, of course. Jason was one of my closest friends, and helping out his mom felt like the least I could do. Dana was in her late 40s, but didn't look it. She had that kind of beauty that didn't fade with time. Dark hair streaked with a bit of silver, bright hazel eyes, and a calm presence that made you feel like things were under control, even when they weren't. The first few days were normal. I came by in the afternoons, did what needed to be done, and left without giving it a second thought. Dana would make small talk while I worked, always grateful, always polite. But by the third day, things started to shift. I was fixing a broken door hinge when Dana offered me a cold drink. We sat on the back porch, the evening sun low in the sky, and somehow the conversation got more personal than it ever had before. She told me about the divorce, how lonely the house felt with Jason gone. It's strange, she said, her voice soft. I thought I'd be happier on my own, but some nights the silence is deafening. I nodded, unsure what to say. There was a sadness in her words that tugged at something inside me, And before I knew it, I told her about my own struggles, how I'd been feeling stuck, like I was drifting without a real purpose. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken things hanging in the air between us. And then she reached over, resting her hand on mine. "You're a good kid," she said, her smile gentle, but something more. "Don't be so hard on yourself." That touch lingered a second too long, and suddenly, everything felt different. I don't know if it was the moment, the vulnerability, or the way the setting sun made everything seem softer, but when she gave me that look like I was someone worth noticing, I was done for. The first kiss was tentative, like neither of us was sure it was really happening. But then it deepened, and every rational thought I had evaporated. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, and before I knew it, we were inside, the door slamming shut behind us. We didn't even make it to the bedroom, just the couch where everything blurred into heat and urgency. It was the kind of reckless, wild moment you only realize is a mistake after it's already over. When it was done, we lay there, tangled up in each other, the weight of what we'd just done pressing down on us. "This can't happen again," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "No," I agreed, though a part of me already knew it was a lie. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, we found more excuses to be alone together. Late-night texts turned into secret visits. I'd tell myself every time that it would be the last, but when I saw her, when she smiled at me like I was the only person in the world who understood her, I couldn't stay away. The guilt gnawed at me every time I saw Jason. He had no idea what was going on behind his back, no clue that the friend he trusted was betraying him in the worst way possible. Every time he texted me, every time he talked about his mom, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. And then, one night, everything unraveled. I was at Dana's house, sitting on the couch with her, lost in one of those moments where nothing felt real. We were so wrapped up in each other that we didn't hear the front door open. Jason walked in. For a second, everything froze. He stood there, his face a mask of confusion as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. "What the fuck?" he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "Jason, I started, but he cut me off." "You've got to be kidding me," he said, his eyes burning with anger. "You were hooking up with my mom?" Dana tried to explain, but Jason wasn't listening. His face twisted with a mix of betrayal and rage, and he shoved me hard. "How long?" he demanded, his fists clenched. "How fucking long has this been going on?" There was nothing I could say, no apology that would make it better. "You were supposed to be my friend," he whispered, his voice cracking. "How could you do this?" I stood there, frozen, knowing I'd just destroyed everything that mattered. "Get out," Jason growled, his voice low and dangerous. I left without another word, the weight of my choices crushing me with every step. Dana tried to reach out afterward, but I ignored her. It was over. Whatever we'd shared wasn't worth the cost. Jason? He blocked me on everything, phone, social media, the works. I tried once or twice to reach out, but it was useless. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. It's been years, and I still think about that night. The moment I could have walked away but didn't. The moment I lost my best friend for something fleeting and selfish. Some mistakes fade with time. Others stay with you, etched into your memory like scars that never heal. And this one, it'll haunt me for the rest of my life. It was raining the night I decided to visit my old apartment. I hadn't been back since I moved out 3 years ago, not even to drive past it. Some places are like that. Too tangled with memories to revisit without feeling like you're dragging ghosts along for the ride. But for some reason, I couldn't stay away that night. Something in me needed to see it, to confirm that it was still there, even if the version of me who used to live there wasn't. The rain was coming down in steady sheets, the kind that blurs everything into a smear of headlights and reflections on wet pavement. I pulled up to the curb across the street and killed the engine, sitting there with the windshield wipers thudding rhythmically, staring at the building like it might dissolve if I blinked too long. It looked the same brick facade, same narrow windows, same little balcony I used to sit on during summer nights, chain smoking and pretending I had everything figured out. I half expected to feel regret or sadness, some sharp pang for the person I'd been back then. But all I felt was a strange kind of numbness, like standing in front of a door you know you'll never walk through again. I was just about to leave when I saw her. A woman stepped out from under the awning of the apartment building, pulling the hood of her raincoat tighter around her face. Even from across the street, I recognized her immediately. It was Mia. My heart stuttered in my chest, and for a moment, I thought about driving off before she could see me. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching as she stood in the rain, fumbling with her umbrella. She looked the same and completely different, all at once, like someone who had grown into herself in ways I'd missed. Same dark eyes, same sharp cheekbones, but softer now, like life had worn down some of her edges. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened the door, stepped out into the rain, and called her name. Mia turned toward me, and the moment she saw me, her expression shifted from confusion to surprise, and then something else, something complicated. "Wow," she said, blinking against the rain. Of all the places, I shoved my hands into my pockets, feeling suddenly awkward under her gaze. "Yeah, small world, huh?" She gave a short, breathy laugh, shaking her head like she couldn't quite believe it. "What are you doing here?" Honestly, I shrugged. "I don't know." She looked at me for a moment, as if trying to figure out if that was the truth. Then she nodded, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Want to grab a coffee or something?" She asked like it was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." We ended up at a little diner around the corner, one of those 24-hour places with cracked vinyl booths and the faint smell of bacon grease lingering in the air. The waitress brought us 2 steaming mugs of coffee, and we sat across from each other, hands curled around the cups, both of us unsure how to start. "So," Mia said, finally breaking the silence, "how have you been?" I smiled a little self-deprecatingly. "Good. Figuring things out. Slowly." She smirked. "Aren't we all?" We talked after that, slipping into the kind of conversation that only old friends or old lovers can have. She told me about her job, how she'd started volunteering at an animal shelter, and how she was learning to cook but still burned toast half the time. I told her about my job, my little victories and bigger failures, and how I still hadn't figured out how to keep houseplants alive. "You always were terrible with plants," she said, laughing softly. "Remember the cactus you managed to kill? I didn't even know that was possible." I groaned, burying my face in my hands. "God, don't remind me." It felt good, light and easy, like stepping back into a favorite sweater you forgot you had. At some point, the conversation drifted to the past, our shared history, all the messy, beautiful moments we'd tried so hard to leave behind. "You ever think about it?" I asked quietly. "Us?" Mia looked down at her coffee, stirring it slowly, even though she hadn't added any cream. "Yeah," she admitted. "I think about it." I nodded, letting her words settle between us. "Me too." There was no sadness in it, no bitterness. Just 2 people acknowledging what had been, without trying to change it. We stayed at the diner longer than we should have, the rain drumming softly against the windows as the night stretched on. At one point, Mia leaned back in the booth, her eyes soft with nostalgia. She said, "I always thought we'd run into each other again. I just didn't think it'd be here." I smiled a little wistfully. "Yeah, same." When the clock on the wall hit 4 a.m., we both knew it was time to leave. The world was starting to wake up outside, the rain easing into a soft mist, and the streets glistened like they were made of glass. Mia walked me back to my car, the 2 of us moving quietly through the damp air, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile peace between us. "Take care of yourself," she said, standing just outside the glow of the streetlight, her hands tucked into her pockets. "You too," I replied, meaning it more than I knew how to say. For a moment, it felt like we were on the edge of something, an old habit, a familiar story. But then Mia smiled, that same soft, knowing smile she always had, and I knew we weren't those people anymore. And that was okay. As I watched her walk away, disappearing into the mist like a memory fading at the edges, I felt something shift in me. Not regret, not sadness, just acceptance. I got into my car, turned the key, and let the engine hum to life. And as I drove away, the rain tapping softly against the windshield, I realized that maybe the past didn't need to be rewritten or fixed. Maybe it just needed to be carried, lightly like an old photograph tucked in your pocket. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. I wasn't planning to go. I'd had a long week, and honestly, the idea of socializing sounded exhausting. But my friend begged me, saying, "Come on, just for a little while. You'll have fun, I promise." Against my better judgment, I went, and that's where I met him. He was sitting across from me at the long table, casually sipping a beer and making everyone laugh with these quick, dry jokes. At some point during the night, we ended up talking, just the two of us, and it felt easy. Like meeting someone you already knew. We didn't flirt exactly. It was more subtle than that. We just clicked. He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room, even in a crowd. I left the dinner thinking, I hope he texts me. And a few hours later, he did. The first message came in around midnight. "You made that dinner way more bearable. Coffee sometime." I smiled at my phone, feeling that flicker of excitement you get when something new is starting. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Our first date was a few days later, at a tiny cafe tucked away on a quiet street. We sat outside, sipping lattes and talking for hours. There was no awkwardness, no pressure to impress. Just two people getting to know each other, wrapped in conversation that felt warm and unhurried. I told him about my weird obsession with crime documentaries, and he told me about his dream to open a bookstore one day. With a coffee bar, obviously, he added with a grin. It was the kind of date that leaves you thinking this could go somewhere. And for a while it did. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was consistent. He showed up. He listened. When I told him about my fear of getting too close to people, he didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "That's fair." When I told him I hated small talk, he smiled and said, "Good. So do I." It felt like finding someone who spoke the same language as me, someone who understood without me having to explain myself. The next few months felt like a dream. We spent weekends exploring new parts of the city, trying every hole-in-the-wall restaurant we could find. He'd send me random texts throughout the day, little things like "saw this and thought of you," or "how's your day going?" It was small, but it meant everything. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe this time, things would be different. And then, slowly, things started to shift. It was nothing obvious at first, just little moments, plans that were made and then canceled, texts that took longer to arrive, conversations that felt slightly off. I told myself not to overthink it. Everyone gets busy. Relationships settle into routines. But the more he pulled away, the more I felt myself slipping into old habits, overanalyzing every interaction, wondering if I'd done something wrong. I asked him about it one night, trying to keep my voice light even though my heart was heavy. "Is everything okay with us?" He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt the first crack. "Yeah," he said slowly. I've got a lot going on right now. Work, family stuff. It's not you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. So I nodded and gave him space, hoping things would go back to the way they were. But they didn't. The distance between us grew wider with every passing day. He stopped making plans, stopped texting just to check in. When we did talk, it felt like we were speaking through a fog, disconnected, distant, as if we were already saying goodbye without realizing it. One night, after he canceled yet another plan, I called him. I needed to know, once and for all, if there was anything left to fight for. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired. "Hey," he said like he knew what was coming. I took a deep breath. I need to know if you're still in this. Because if you're not, it's okay. I just need to know." There was a long silence, the kind that makes your stomach twist into knots. Finally, he said, "I don't think I am. I thought I could be, but I'm not sure I'm in the right place for this right now." There it was, the ending I'd been dreading. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay," I whispered. "Thanks for being honest." We said our goodbyes, quiet, polite, final. When I hung up, I sat there in the dark, trying to wrap my head around it. How do you go from sharing your life with someone to nothing? How do you let go of the future you thought you were building together? In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I told myself it wasn't my fault, that not every connection is meant to last. But the thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't follow a schedule. It sneaks up on you when you least expect it, in the middle of a song, or when you pass by a place you wanted together, or when you catch yourself reaching for your phone to tell them something before you remember you can't. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to ask him if he regretted it, if he missed me, but I knew better. I knew that some things are better left unfinished, that chasing after closure only prolongs the pain. So instead, I let him go, quietly, without fanfare. It hasn't been easy. Some days, I feel fine, like I'm finally on the other side of it. But other days, the sadness creeps in, heavy and uninvited. And I think that's okay. Healing isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes it feels like you're moving backward. But every day it gets a little easier. I still believe in love, even after everything. Not in the perfect storybook kind of way, but in the messy, complicated way that life tends to deliver it. I believe that one day, I'll meet someone who stays. Not because it's easy, but because they choose to. And until then, I'll keep showing up for myself. I'll keep building a life I love, one piece at a time. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. I am enough, with or without someone else. And that is a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. So here I am, still standing, still hoping, and still believing that love, real, messy, imperfect love, is out there. And when it finds me, I'll be ready. The first time I tried flirting at a trivia night, I almost broke up a friend group by accident. Honestly, I just wanted to show off that I knew the capital of Liechtenstein. Things spiraled from there. It all started because my buddy Chris dragged me to this bar for their weekly trivia night. It's a great place to meet people, he said, conveniently leaving out the part where it's mostly competitive teams of trivia fanatics who take this stuff way too seriously. I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the whole idea, but it was either this or another night of doom scrolling on my couch. So I went, fully expecting to sit quietly, answer exactly one question about Star Wars, and leave without incident. And then I saw her. She was at the bar with a group of people, laughing as they argued over whether or not the periodic table question had been worded unfairly. She was beautiful in that cool, effortless way. Messy bun, oversized denim jacket, a beer in one hand, and the kind of laugh that made you want to join whatever conversation she was having. I turned to Chris. I think I like trivia now. Chris grinned. Go talk to her. Ask to join their team or something. That sounds like a terrible idea, I said, already planning exactly how I was going to do it. I waited for an opportunity, which came 5 minutes later when I overheard her friend loudly declare, "There is no way Luxembourg is a real country." That was my moment. I walked over, trying to look casual, but probably looking like I was trying way too hard. "Actually, Luxembourg is real," I said, sliding into their conversation. "It's small, but it's real." The group turned to look at me, and for a second, I was sure they were going to tell me to leave. But then she smiled. "Thank you. I told you guys it was real," she said, nudging the guy next to her. "This random stranger agrees with me, so I win." The guy, who I later found out was named Ben, rolled his eyes. "Okay, fine, Luxembourg is real. But I still don't think it's a real answer to the trivia question." "Geography is geography," I said, shrugging. "You can't argue with borders." That made her laugh, and it was such a good laugh that I knew I had to keep the conversation going. "I'm Jake," I said, holding out my hand. "Mind if I join your team?" She hesitated for just a second, glancing at her friends. "What do you guys think? Can we use some fresh brain power?" Ben looked like he was about to say no, but another one of her friends chimed in. "Sure, why not? The more, the merrier." And just like that, I was part of Team Quizzard of Oz. They introduced themselves. Her name was Emily, by the way, and I did my best to pull my weight during the game. I got a few questions right here and there, mostly random facts about pop culture and obscure geography. Honestly, I was mostly just trying not to embarrass myself. Everything was going great. The drinks were flowing, the conversation was easy, and I was riding high on the thrill of impressing Emily with my deeply useless knowledge of European microstates. And then came the disaster question. "All right," the trivia host said, leaning into the mic for double points. "Which 1994 film features the quote, 'That's some high-quality H2O'? I grinned. "Easy. It's The Waterboy." Before anyone else could answer, I said it out loud. Loud enough for the whole table. and unfortunately, the other teams to hear. Ben immediately shot me a look that could have melted steel. Dude, we were going to steal that answer. Oh, I said, realizing my mistake a second too late. Sorry, I thought. I mean, it was obvious, right? Ben looked like I had just insulted his entire family lineage. It's not about being obvious, he hissed. It's about strategy. Emily rolled her eyes. Ben, relax. It's just a game. It's not just a game, Ben muttered, crossing his arms. It's about winning. I could feel the tension in the air, and suddenly, my fun little flirting experiment felt a lot more like walking through a minefield. I glanced at Emily, hoping she wasn't about to kick me off the team for ruining their night. But instead, she leaned in, grinning. Don't worry, she whispered. Ben takes trivia way too seriously. You're doing great. That little moment, just her leaning in and smiling like we were sharing a secret, gave me the boost I needed to keep going. We ended up answering the rest of the questions together, laughing every time Ben got irrationally mad about something trivial. By the end of the night, we didn't win. Not even close, thanks to me blurting out the Waterboy answer. But I didn't care. Because when the game wrapped up and people started collecting their things, Emily turned to me and said, "So, do you want to grab a drink somewhere else?" Without all the trivia drama. I blinked, trying to play it cool, but probably looking like I just won the lottery. Yeah, I said, grinning. I'd like that. Ben scowled as we left the bar together. But honestly, totally worth it. This one's known as the prom after-party incident, and it lives in infamy for a reason. To this day, none of us know how we weren't arrested, or worse, banned from graduating. It was supposed to be a simple after-party. Just a few friends, some cheap beer, and an old lake house. But like every high school disaster, it got wildly out of hand. First, it all started when my friend Tyler, who had zero understanding of limits, boundaries, or good decisions, offered to host the after-party at his uncle's vacation cabin. Now, when most people hear the words lake house, they imagine a cozy little cottage. What Tyler failed to mention was that the cabin was a rundown, moldy nightmare that had probably been built sometime in the 1970s and left to rot ever since. The plumbing was questionable, the electricity was unreliable, and the entire place smelled faintly of wet dog. Naturally, we thought it was perfect. The plan was simple. We'd leave from early, pile into our cars, and head out to the lake for a night of partying and freedom. Tyler promised there would be beer, snacks, and absolutely no adult supervision. What could possibly go wrong? The first red flag appeared when we arrived at the lake house and realized there were way more people than we expected. Tyler, being Tyler, had accidentally invited half the school. Cars were packed into the driveway and spilling out onto the dirt road. Someone had already built a fire pit in the backyard, and the music was so loud it could probably be heard from space. But the real problem? No one knew who brought the inflatable raft. There it was, sitting on the edge of the lake, a giant, inflatable party raft with built-in cup holders, speakers, and enough space for about 10 people. It was the kind of thing you see in music videos where people make bad life decisions. And of course, the second Tyler saw it, he yelled, "Everybody on the raft! We're taking this thing to the middle of the lake." Now listen, there's a lot of stuff that teenagers are bad at. Following rules, planning ahead, basic survival skills, but one thing we are exceptionally good at is ignoring red flags. So instead of asking questions like, "Whose raft is this?" or "Is this even legal?" we all sprinted toward the lake like we were storming the beaches of Normandy. About a dozen of us climbed onto the raft, including Tyler, who was holding an open beer can, a Bluetooth speaker, and what appeared to be a stolen garden gnome. Don't ask. Someone started blasting music, and before we knew it, we were drifting out into the middle of the lake, laughing and yelling like we were on some kind of spring break yacht. For the first 10 minutes, it was perfect. The stars were out, the music was pumping, and everything felt right. But then, things started to go south. First of all, nobody thought to bring paddles. We were completely at the mercy of the wind and the current, which meant we had no control over where the raft was going. Second problem? Tyler, in his infinite wisdom, decided it was the perfect time to start playing Truth or Dare. Now, Truth or Dare on a floating raft full of drunk teenagers is already a bad idea. But Tyler, being Tyler, took things to the next level. "I dare you," he said to my friend Eric. to jump off the raft and swim to shore. Eric, never one to back down from a challenge, grinned and said, "Bet." Without another word, he cannonballed off the side of the raft, sending water everywhere. The problem? Eric was a terrible swimmer. He made it about 10 feet before he started flailing, yelling, "I think I messed up," in between desperate gasps for air. The rest of us were too busy laughing to realize how serious it was, until Tyler, in a rare moment of clarity, said, "Oh shit, somebody should probably get him." That's when Jenny, who had taken exactly one lifeguard class 3 years ago, decided she was the hero of the night. She jumped in after Eric, but instead of saving him, she somehow got tangled up in his flailing limbs. And now we had 2 people drowning about 20 feet from the raft. At this point, most of us were either panicking or drunk, or both. Tyler, completely unfazed by the situation, grabbed a pool noodle and tossed it toward them like that was going to help. It didn't. They were thrashing around, yelling for help, while the rest of us tried to figure out what the hell we were supposed to do. And that's when the boat showed up. Out of nowhere, a police boat came cruising across the lake, its searchlight sweeping the water like it was hunting escaped prisoners. We all froze. There was no way they could see us through the darkness, but we knew the second they hit us with that spotlight, the party was over. Someone whispered, "Act casual," which, looking back, was probably the dumbest thing anyone could have said, considering there were 2 people drowning in the water. Tyler was holding a stolen garden gnome, and the Bluetooth speaker was still blasting party rock anthem at full volume. We tried to play it cool, huddling together on the raft like a bunch of innocent kids just enjoying a peaceful night on the lake. Meanwhile, Eric and Jenny were still flailing around like 2 drunk otters, and the police boat was getting closer by the second. "Shut OFF the speaker," someone hissed. Tyler, instead of turning it off, just skipped to the next song, which for some reason was the Jaws theme. Perfect. The boat's searchlight hit us, and we all collectively held our breath, waiting for the officers to shout at us, arrest us, or, at the very least, haul Eric and Jenny out of the water. But instead, the boat slowed down and then just kept going. They didn't stop. They didn't even look twice. And that's when we realized they thought we were adults. Apparently, the combination of the loud music, the beer cans, and Tyler's unhinged confidence had convinced the cops that we were just a bunch of rowdy 20-somethings having a normal night on the lake. They must have figured it wasn't worth the hassle and just kept going. The second the boat was out of sight, we sprang into action. We managed to haul Eric and Jenny back onto the raft, soaking wet, gasping for air, but otherwise unharmed. Tyler, still grinning like a madman, raised his beer and shouted, "That was awesome." We eventually drifted back to shore, cold, soaked, and in various stages of panic, but somehow no one got caught. No arrests, no suspensions, nothing. The only real consequence was the mysterious disappearance of the garden gnome, which we never saw again. To this day, whenever someone brings up prom night, the only thing anyone talks about is the raft incident. And every time, without fail, someone will say, "I still can't believe the cops just left." And Tyler? Tyler always raises his drink and says, "Told you guys, confidence is everything." It was one of those nights that sneaks up on you. I hadn't planned on going out. Honestly, I wasn't even in the mood to socialize. But then my phone buzzed. "We're heading out, don't make excuses. You need this." And somehow, that one text was all it took to get me off the couch and into a dress that I hadn't worn in ages, the kind that makes you feel like maybe, just maybe, you're in control of your life, even if only for a few hours. The bar was packed, buzzing with that electric energy only a Friday night can bring. People were everywhere, laughing, shouting, clinking glasses, and the air smelled like perfume, spilled beer, and poor decisions waiting to happen. I told myself I'd stay for a bit, just enough to prove I made an effort. 1 drink, 2 if I was feeling generous with myself. Then I'd leave. But then he happened. I noticed him as I waited for my first drink. A tall guy with dark, unruly hair, leaning on the bar like he owned it. He didn't look like he was trying to impress anyone, which of course made him twice as attractive. His eyes flicked toward me for just a second, a quick glance that felt like a hook. I caught it, and just like that, the night shifted. I didn't wait for him to make a move. Maybe it was the dress, or the gin making me feel bold, or just the fact that he looked like exactly the kind of trouble I'd been trying to avoid. I stepped closer, smiled, and said something clever. Or at least, I think it was clever. Whatever it was, it made him laugh. The kind of laugh that makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room, even if you aren't. Before I knew it, we were talking like old friends, leaning in close, trading stories that neither of us would remember in the morning. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of dance. The way some conversations glide effortlessly forward, no stumbles or awkward pauses. Every time our knees brushed, or his hand grazed mine, it sent a little jolt through me, like the night itself was daring me to see where this could go. And, of course, we both knew exactly where it was going. The drinks kept coming. Time blurred. At some point, we were standing too close, his hand resting low on my back, his breath warm against my ear as he murmured, "Want to get out of here?" It wasn't really a question. It was more like an agreement we both signed without a word. The cab ride to his place was a tangle of kisses and laughter, the kind of messy, drunken joy that makes the city feel like it's spinning just for you. By the time we stumbled through his apartment door, I wasn't thinking about anything but the way his hands felt on me. Hot, deliberate, like he knew exactly what I needed. The sex was good, maybe not perfect, but real, the kind of intimacy that feels more like surrender than strategy. We crashed into each other like waves, all heat and urgency, and for a little while, it was exactly what I wanted. No overthinking, no second-guessing. Just two strangers lost in the dark, sharing a moment that felt like freedom. But mornings always tell a different story. I woke up to sunlight cutting across the room, the harsh kind that leaves no room for illusion. His bed was too small, his sheets tangled around my legs like they were trying to hold me there. He was still asleep beside me, his face relaxed in a way that made him look softer, almost innocent. For a second, I thought about staying, letting him wake up to find me there, seeing if the connection we'd shared in the dark would survive the light of day. But I knew better. These things never translate well in the morning. So I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and started gathering my clothes from the floor. There's always something surreal about dressing in the morning after silence, like you're performing in a play without an audience. Each piece of clothing I pulled on felt heavier, like it carried the weight of every night like this that had come before. I was almost at the door when I heard him stir behind me. "You leaving?" he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. I turned, giving him the kind of smile that's more apology than anything else. "Yeah, I've got some stuff to do." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. He nodded, rubbing a hand across his face, and gave me a small, sleepy smile. "Well, it was fun." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb was cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. I pulled my coat tighter around me, hoping it would help, but it didn't. The chill wasn't just in the air, it was inside me too, that familiar, gnawing emptiness that always shows up when the night is over. The Uber ride home was a blur of silence and headlights streaking across wet pavement. I stared out the window, feeling the weight of the night settle into me like a stone at the bottom of a lake. I told myself it was fine. This was what I'd wanted, something light, something fun, nothing complicated. But the truth was sitting heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Nights like these always feel good in the moment, but the mornings after are another story. It's not about the person, not really. It's about the pattern. The way I keep throwing myself into these fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the empty spaces inside me, only to find that they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed, too tired to even change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unforgiving, and I lay there, waiting for the heaviness to lift. It didn't. It never does. I wish I could say this was the last time, that I'd finally learned my lesson, stopped chasing highs that always left me feeling low. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe one day, I'll stop. Maybe I'll figure out how to want less, or how to want something real. Or maybe I'll just keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One drink, one kiss, one morning after the next. It wasn't planned, not that night or any other. But with Mia, things always had a way of happening before I could think them through. We were best friends for years, practically inseparable. The kind of friendship that feels more like family, where everything is second nature. We knew each other's quirks, each other's favorite songs, each other's heartbreaks. And for a long time, that was enough. Until it wasn't. It was late. One of those humid summer nights when the heat makes everything feel heavy. She'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I'd been keeping her company the way I always did. We'd been out for drinks, the kind of night where you say, just one, and then somehow the bartender knows your name by the end of it. By the time we got back to my place, we were both tipsy and laughing, but it wasn't the happy kind of laughter. It was the kind that's covering up something else. You know what sucks? Mia said, kicking off her shoes and collapsing onto my couch. Everyone always leaves. Not everyone, I said, sitting down next to her. She gave me this tired smile, the one she always gave me when life wore her down, but she didn't want me to worry. Yeah, but everyone who matters. That's not true. I told her and I meant it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes softer than they usually were. You never leave, she whispered. And just like that, the space between us shifted, heavy and charged, like we'd stumbled into something neither of us was ready for. I could have cracked a joke, defused the moment, but I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Mia, I started, but before I could say anything else, she kissed me. It wasn't slow. It wasn't tentative. It was the kind of kiss that felt inevitable, like every late-night conversation, every shared secret, every moment we'd ever had was leading to this. And the second her lips touched mine, everything I'd been pretending not to feel came crashing down around me. I kissed her back because, honestly, I didn't know how not to. She was Mia, messy, complicated, brilliant Mia, and I was already too far gone to stop myself. We ended up in my bed, limbs tangled, hearts racing, and for a little while it felt perfect. Like we'd found something we didn't even know we were missing. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, my hand tracing lazy patterns on her back, her head resting on my chest. I could feel her breath against my skin, slow and steady, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. This doesn't have to change anything, right? She whispered, her voice small. I knew what she meant. I knew she was scared. Scared of losing me. Scared of what this meant. Scared of breaking something that had always been good. And I could have told her the truth. I could have said that it changed everything. That I'd been in love with her for years and didn't know how to stop. But I didn't. Yeah, I whispered back. It doesn't have to change anything. But it did. The next morning was quiet. We tried to act normal, coffee, small talk, the usual banner. But there was an edge to everything, like we were both trying too hard. When she left, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "See you later," and I smiled like I believed her. For the next few weeks, we slipped into this strange limbo. Friends most of the time, lovers when the moment felt right. It was easy to pretend that nothing had changed when we were tangled up in each other. But the second she left my bed, reality came crashing in. I knew I was falling for her again, harder this time, but I didn't know how to tell her. Every time I thought about saying the words out loud, the fear crept in. What if she didn't feel the same? What if saying it ruined everything? So I kept quiet, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd figure it out on her own. She didn't. One night, out of nowhere, she told me she was going on a date. "It's not serious," she said, like that would make it easier. "Just a guy from work." I smiled, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. "That's great." I lied. She gave me this look, soft and apologetic, like she knew exactly what she was doing but didn't know how to stop. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I loved her, I wasn't the person she wanted. Not really. We kept sleeping together after that, but it felt different. Every kiss tasted like goodbye. Every touch a reminder that I was holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. And the worst part? I let it happen because I didn't know how to let her go. The end came slowly, the way it always does with people who mean too much. One day, she stopped texting as often. The late-night calls became less frequent. And before I knew it, we were strangers occupying the same memories, trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. The last time I saw her, we hugged goodbye, and it felt like the final page of a book I wasn't ready to finish. I wanted to tell her everything, that I loved her, that I always had, that losing her felt like losing a part of myself. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "Take care, Mia," like it was nothing. And then she was gone. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, replaying our conversations in my head, wondering if things could have been different. I miss her laugh, her sarcasm, the way everything felt lighter when she was around. But most of all, I miss the version of me that existed when I was with her. The one who believed that maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to hurt. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best decision you'll ever make or the worst mistake of your life. For me, it was both. For a little while I had her, and even though it ended, even though it left me with more questions than answers, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people come into your life to stay, and some only pass through. And maybe, if you're lucky, you get to love them, even if it's only for a little while. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. A few months ago, my cousin Ben asked if I could help him move into his new apartment. He'd found this place on the outskirts of town, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, and the rent was dirt cheap for what it was, a spacious two-bedroom on the top floor of a small building. Too good to pass up, even if the building was old and a little rundown. When I pulled up with my car loaded with his stuff, I noticed something off right away. The place had this strange vibe, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, even though you can't put your finger on why. It was late afternoon, and the shadows from the trees out front made the whole building look darker than it should have been, like it was sucking in the light. Ben waved at me from the second-floor balcony, grinning like a kid on Christmas. "Hey, you made it? Place is pretty sweet, huh?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, ma. Looks nice." We spent the next couple of hours hauling furniture up 2 flights of narrow stairs. The stairwell smelled like old carpet and something faintly metallic, like rust. I try not to think about it. Moving is never pleasant, right? By the time we finished, it was almost dusk. We sat on the living room floor, drinking beers and laughing about how out of shape we were. Ben seemed thrilled with the place, but the whole time I was there, I kept glancing at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I don't know how to explain it, but something about that hallway, it felt wrong. Too dark, even with the lights on. Like the shadows clung to the walls longer than they should. I chalked it up to exhaustion and told myself I was overthinking things. Then, as we were finishing our beers, Ben brought it up. So he said, leaning back against the wall, "The only weird thing about this place? The second bedroom door doesn't stay shut." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "It just pops open sometimes, even when I know I shut it. I've tried locking it too, but it doesn't make a difference. The landlord said it's because the building's old, but yeah, kind of creepy, right?" I laughed it off, but the knot of unease in my stomach tightened. We finished our beers, and I helped him unpack a few boxes before heading home. As I left, I glanced back at the building one last time. The windows on the second floor looked dark, like empty eyes watching me drive away. That night, Ben texted me around midnight. Door opened again. LOL. Guess it likes me. I sent a laughing emoji, trying to ignore the chill that crept over me. 2 nights later, I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Ben, calling me at 2:30 a.m. "Ben, what's up?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a shaky voice, he whispered, "It's open again." I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. "What do you mean? The door? It's not just open this time," he whispered. I swear I heard it. Something moving in there. My mouth went dry. "Stay on the phone. I'll come over." "No," he hissed. "I don't want you to come. Just stay on the phone, okay? I think it's in the hallway." My heart was pounding now. "Ben, get out of there. Go to the door and leave." He didn't answer for a moment. All I could hear was his shaky breathing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I can't. If I move, it'll know." I threw on my clothes, grabbed my car keys, and ran to the door. "I'm on my way," I said, trying to sound calm. "Stay where you are. Just keep talking to me, okay?" "I think it's at my bedroom door," he whispered. "I can hear it breathing." I've never driven so fast in my life. The streets were empty, my headlights cutting through the dark, but every second felt like an hour. I kept him on the phone the whole time, but he barely spoke, Just short, breathless whispers about something moving outside his room. Slow and deliberate. When I pulled up to the building, the front door was already unlocked. I sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway leading to Ben's apartment was darker than I remembered, like the shadows had grown deeper. I reached his door and threw it open, calling his name. The apartment was dead silent. No sign of Ben. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Ben! I called again, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. Then I saw it, the second bedroom door. It was wide open. The air was freezing, so cold my breath came out in puffs. I shone my phone's flashlight into the room, my hand shaking. The walls were bare, the floor empty except for a few scattered boxes. But something was wrong. The shadows inside the room seemed thicker, as if they had weight to them. And then I saw it, a faint shape crouched in the far corner. I stepped back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The shape shifted slightly, and I swear, for a split second, I saw a pair of glowing eyes. Yellow, faint, but unmistakable, peeking out from the darkness. And then the door slammed shut. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I grabbed my phone and tried calling Ben, but the call went straight to voicemail. Frantic, I searched the apartment from top to bottom, calling his name over and over. But there was no sign of him. His keys, his phone, everything was still there, like he'd just vanished into thin air. I stood in the empty living room, heart racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I heard it. A faint knock. It came from the other side of the second bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, like someone tapping gently to get my attention. Top, top, top. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, gasping for breath. I drove straight home, hands shaking on the wheel, my mind spinning with 100 questions and no answers. I called the landlord the next day, desperate for some kind of explanation. All he said was, "That room's always been strange. People don't stay long once they realize." I haven't heard from Ben since that night. His phone is still disconnected, and no one, friends, family, has seen or heard from him. It's like he disappeared into that room, swallowed by whatever was waiting on the other side. But sometimes, late at night, I get a text from his number. Just 3 words. It's still open. And I know, wherever he is, he's not alone.